We've got Philip up.
He's struggling here. I'm going to...
Okay. We'll crack it on here. First of all, are we content to move through the agenda? Agreed. Members, any apologies? None. I saw Matthew earlier on, so I expect him to be there. And has any member got the delegated authority to another member of the committee to vote under Temporary Standing Order 115? Nope. Declaration of interest. All members are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interest at each committee meeting is applicable. I'd just like to say that I know quite a few of the witnesses who are coming in today, including Jeff Potter and some of the members from the Ulster Farmers Union. I just want to make that on the record. Any other relevant interest to declare? Nope. Chairperson's business. There are no items for Chair's business. Draft minutes proceedings on the 8th of September. The draft minutes of the Finance Committee meeting on the 8th of September are at page 7. Are we content? These are accurate. Thank you. Record of proceedings. Yep, agreed. No matters arising. If we move on to the next item on the agenda, item number 6, written briefing, business forfeiture. Members are asked to note at page 17 the ministerial correspondence on the business tenancies coronavirus restriction and forfeiture relevant period Northern Ireland number 3 regulations 2021. The committee agreed the previous rule in July providing that a right of re-entry or forfeiture under a relevant business tenancy for non-payment of rent may not be enforced by action or otherwise until the 30th of September 2021. The committee will recollect that we discussed whether that could be extended or not, and at the time it was thought we didn't need to get through with the statutory rule to get it through. The anticipated statutory rule would extend this moratorium and forfeiture until the 25th of March 2022. Members will recall that the Minister advised that the UK Government had unexpectedly extended similar provisions in England to March 2022 and announced plans for primary legislation to ring-fence outstanding unpaid rent built up during this pandemic, as well as providing for the imposition of a compulsory and binding statutory arbitration process for rental disputes. The anticipated statutory rule will only extend the moratorium. In the meantime, the Department continues to scrutinise the English measures. The Minister indicates that further related measures may be brought to manage the transition to the resumption of usual forfeiture proceedings. The Minister advised there will be no formal SL1. Are members content with the policy? Content with the policy content of the regulations, which simply extend the moratorium until March 2022? And are members content for the Department to make the rule? Are we agreed? Agreed. Do members have any other questions to raise in respect of the related measures that may be brought to manage the transition to the resumption of usual forfeiture proceedings? Yep. Great. Next item, number 7, written briefing, the new NAV list. You'll remember this from previous committee meetings. I refer members to Statute Rule 245, the new NAV list, Time Evaluation Order Northern Ireland 2021 at page 22. The purpose of the rule is to set 1st of October 2021 as the antecedent valuation date, AVD, for the 2023 revaluation of all non-domestic properties. The Minister announced on the 16th of June 2021 that the next revaluation of commercial property listed in the net NAV list non-domestic properties is to be introduced from the 1st of April 2023. This will reset the valuations used within the non-domestic rating system. In preparation for the 2023 reval exercise, the value of a property has to be ascertained by reference to a particular date, known as the AVD. Owing to the time needed to revalue all the non-domestic property in Northern Ireland, the AVD is always set in advance of the date upon which the new NAV list will come into force. The rule is subject to negative resolution procedures and is to come into operation on the 1st of October 2021. The Examiner of Statutory Rules has yet to report on this rule. Members are therefore, if we are content, the Committee for Finance has considered the Statutory Rule, Statute Rule 245, the new NAV list Time Evaluation Order Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objections to the rule. Are we agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Okay, can we bring in John, Mark, Jeff and Peter into the spotlight? There we go. Committee, we're receiving oral briefing from the Road Haulage Association on the Northern Ireland Protocol EU exit. The committee will now receive an oral briefing from the Road Haulage Association. I'd like to welcome John, Mark, Jeff and Peter. Can you all hear us?
Yes.
Excellent. And just so you're aware, the Clerk's note is at page 28, the Road Haulage Association submission is at page 41, a target transport submission is page 47, Graham Adams' submission is at page 56, an Assembly research paper provided previously to the Committee on the Internal Market Act and the Protocol is page 60. I'd just like everybody to be aware that the session has been recorded by Hansard. I'm asked the witnesses to make their opening statement, allowing them 5 minutes each and 15 minutes in total for all opening statements before questions. Who's starting off first? Who's going to lead on?
I think, Chairman, I will do the initial introduction and then hand over to some of the other members, if that's okay with you.
Certainly, more than happy.
First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for the invite to brief them today on the continuing impact of the new trading arrangements between GB and Northern Ireland and the outworkings of the Northern Irish Protocol. It's accepted that some businesses may have benefited from the new trading arrangements if their sole or main market is in the EU. However, the vast majority of trade by Northern Ireland businesses is with GB, and in particular the strong agri-food and manufacturing sectors in Northern Ireland. Any distortion to this trade has a knock-on effect on logistics, as most of the product moves via road transport. Logistics is a low-margin, highly efficient, just-in-time service which has been blown apart by these new trading arrangements. This will affect the vast majority of consumers in Northern Ireland. It will also affect the vast majority of businesses. Hence the reason and the rationale for inviting 3 RHA members along today. They're from 3 very different sectors. One is from pure logistics, the other is in relation to manufacturing, and the third is in relation to freight forwarding. I won't go into any detail in relation to the impact of the protocol because these 3 folks will cover in sufficient detail on the effects that it's having on their business viability and the efficiency and the economics of the businesses. First, I'll hand you over to Jeff Potter, who's the Managing Director for Graham Adams Ireland Limited.
Hi, Jeff.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that, John. And could I just echo John's thanks to the team. It's great actually to have the opportunity to speak to everyone today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank John and the RHA for their support at a time when I would say most bodies were disregarding what businesses on the ground were saying. So I really appreciate all that the RHA have done to actually get us to this stage. I thought it was worthwhile just picking up on some of the comments John's made there about the benefits to protocol. Undoubtedly, there are benefits to protocol in terms of access to European mainland markets. But for a company like Graham Adams, whose 90% of our business would remain in Northern Ireland or go back to GB, I have to say that it has been, I suppose, diplomatically put a lose-lose scenario. Others would have other words for it, but it has been tough. And I think we're at the stage where the current system as it sits today is dysfunctional, it's bureaucratic, and it is basically unsustainable in the longer term. Now, I don't want to use today as a means of moaning about the problems that we've had over the last 8.5 months, because business has put forward proposals to improve the situation. Those proposals have ranged from the redefinition of the term at risk, so that would only include goods that are actually at risk of going into the Republic of Ireland. It also would include a simplification of the current supplementary declaration process, which is extremely bureaucratic, and it also would have an element of digitisation or computerisation that would come into play as well, but that was on the refined process. I think my main objective today is, I suppose the nicest thing, the most positive thing that's happened over the last 8.5 months has been the government's latest command paper of July 2021, where finally we have, I believe, a framework that we can move forward on. And I believe we have an official recognition that there are the problems that I'm going to talk about and my other colleagues are going to talk about today. It is nice to see those officially recognised, because I have to say, in the first number of months of this year, they simply were being disregarded. So I'm not suggesting that the 3 steps that I've put in my report or that are going to be the answer. When Peter talks later, and Peter Summerton, he'll talk in more detail about SPS. SPS is a nightmare, there's no doubt about it. But I think the 3 suggestions that have been put forward by business that I've alluded to would be a step in the right direction. So for me, this is, where can we go from today? How can we move things forward? Businesses must be part of the solution moving forward. We can't continue to sit in the sidelines and watch what has been a major car crash happening. We need to roll our sleeves up, we need to get out there, and we need to pick the pieces up. And we're happy to do that. I would finish by just using the words of Baroness Hoey in her address to the House of Lords on Monday. And she said, the problem for establishment committees is that they go for well-known regular commentators, and they know what they're going to say before they turn up. But those at grassroots of what is happening in Northern Ireland get ignored, not listened to. And once again, I would thank the committee for allowing us to present today, and thank you for listening to the grassroots. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay, I can maybe bring in Mark Tate, the owner and manager in Target Transport.
Hi, Mark.
Hello, folks. Yes, committee chair, thank you very much for listening to us today. I'll not keep us too long in terms of my summary. I sent you a fairly comprehensive breakdown of what we have experienced since the 1st of January this year. Needless to say, I agree with very much what Jeff's saying, that as we see things at the minute, the protocol does not work for our type of business. Haulage is clearly at the forefront and the coalface of actually having to get goods across the Irish Sea, and we have to remember that happens in both directions. The bureaucracy that we face as a small family-run company is getting to the stage where it's almost unsustainable for us. We know there's possibly more coming down the pipeline when grace periods end, and I don't think we can possibly cope with that. Where do I go? It's just an absolute bureaucratic mess from our point of view of actually having to move goods across the Irish Sea, which we know are not destined for the Republic of Ireland or EU market. I give an example. Yesterday I counted about 45 shipments we moved in one day. 3 of them were destined for ROI, but yet I have to do declarations for all 45 shipments. That takes time, that's administration, that administration costs money. We don't have the staff to compete with bigger companies, and we are seriously concerned as a business like ours that we are in somewhat a race to the bottom to compete with bigger companies other than ourselves. Again, I'll reiterate what Jeff's saying there about the command paper. I think it is a sensible step forward. That term of at risk needs to be seriously redefined. If we get to the stage where we're actually declaring goods at risk and the other freight is not being declared at risk coming into Northern Ireland, then obviously that's a workable first step solution. But at the minute, we don't see any real progress. I'll not keep anybody long, as I know Peter will have plenty to say on the SPS, but guys, it's just got to the stage where we are seriously considering the future of our business because of the way things are operating, and whether or not we continue after the end of this year will depend on what comes in the next few months between the UK and the EU. I will hand over to Peter.
Mark, just
yes,
before you go, what you said there worries me considerably. And you obviously, as a small business, are looking at your cash flow, and you're also looking at the other issues. I don't want to put you in a position or something to do that, but what you've said, I think, has a lot of resonance both with this committee and should have a lot of resonance with everybody in this assembly. If businesses like yourself are really concerned if you're still going to be a going concern by the early new year, that is really worrying. And look, from our perspective, if there's anything we can do, because we do not want you to be in that position.
Well, I thank you for your comment. having had regular meetings with the Chair Support Service, and I'm sure you've probably seen what I have written there, the system simply from a groupage model is not fit for purpose. We do not have a sustained, modern, efficient groupage model there for us to move freight the way we moved it prior to the 1st of January this year. Now, we knew things were going to change, but obviously the bureaucracy involved was horrendous. If I give you examples there where freight is not, we're moving freight that's not bought or sold, we're moving goods back from guys that are on site, and we simply cannot understand why we're having to go through this bureaucratic nightmare when we know that these goods are coming, they're never going to leave Northern Ireland, they're coming back from Northern Ireland for either reprocessing or for something else to happen to them. And I'm spending sometimes 10, 15 minutes per declaration, and if you're doing 30, 40 of them a day, that takes a lot of time between us and our staff. And we simply cannot cope with the pressure.
Thanks, Mark. Peter?
Thank you, Chairman, for this opportunity to speak to the committee. First of all, I'll give a brief introduction to McCulloch Ireland. McCulloch Ireland have depots in Lisburn and in Dublin. We service the internal Irish market, north and south, as well as movements between GB and Northern Ireland and GB and the Republic of Ireland, with operators' licences in both jurisdictions. We have, along with that, a sustainability model where we highly value the future and have set up our own anaerobic digestion plants to create the gas to not only create electric for our cold stores, but also to fuel our vehicles. And it's with that backdrop that I think that our commitment to Northern Ireland can clearly be seen, and also our commitment to sustainability can be seen. Along with RHA, we work through the models for Brexit, if you like, through 2019 and 2020. We were clear in what we seen in terms of how the protocol was going to manifest itself, especially as how Mark has suggested there for the groupage model. And quite simply, what has happened here is an international supply chain model for customs and SPS has been applied to our regional, fully integrated, just-in-time delivery network throughout the UK. So I'm really only going to focus on our Northern Ireland GB and GB Northern Ireland activities for the purpose of this committee. Key to that, because we operate for food service, retail, hospitality and manufacturing, we've got a unique viewpoint. We're not in any one camp. We're operating across the whole food sector. And the greatest challenges that we've seen is how does government and how did government actually expect the protocol to work? We're called to many meetings to describe how it's not working, but how did they expect it to work whenever you apply these international rules to the domestic integrated supply chain? It increases time, it increases cost, it increases complexity. If I go straight to the SPS checks, which are designed around bulk movements, these are hampering the movement of vehicles between GB and the NI. Quite simply, in order to follow the process, you have to give the vehicle trailer number to the veterinary official in GB that you intend to use for their movement. That removes all flexibility from the planning process, because at that point in time, that vehicle is then locked. If anything changes and that load actually gets cancelled or delayed, that driver and that vehicle can't be diverted anywhere else because it has simply been locked on to that job. The system is so inflexible. It's designed around sea containers. Whenever we look at how those SPS rules are applied to mixed pallets, whereas they're designed around commodities which move in bulk, they're now being applied to basic restaurant single pallet deliveries, which might have 20, 30, 40 different commodities on them, requiring 10, 12, 15 different health certs. That in turn, whenever that gets onto the vehicle, it gets to Port of Belfast. And some of those are subject to compulsory checks. That prevents me from even planning that lorry coming off the 7 o'clock Birkenhead boat out on my delivery vehicles on that morning, because I don't know if the truck's going to get held at the port for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. So it's adding more time, more cost, more complexity. The sheer flexibility of the system is challenging everybody. And whenever I work through with our colleagues at DEFRA and DERA as to what the biggest problems they have is that people can't actually get the trailer numbers to work in sequence with the EHC. So we're actually seeing these as conformance issues coming through Port of Belfast. We're not at McCullough, Ireland. We're actually taking the pain and the cost. Others are seeing them as conformance issues. Whenever we look at our Dublin operations, we can see what the future looks like. We can see what no easements looks like regarding those movements between GB and a third country, which is effectively what's going to happen with Northern Ireland. The movements between GB and the Republic of Ireland have been massively curtailed. We're now operating with a supermarket on a day 1 for day 10 ordering profile because it takes that long to operate the paperwork. It used to be a day 1 for day 2 service. It's now a day 1 for day 10 because they have to get all the documentation and the commodities right before that trailer can even leave the port. So we have a view of what life looks like after easements, and it's not a pretty view. As we move forward, and as we look at the challenges that the business has, groupage between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is almost on its knees. The only people moving groupage between GB and NI are people who've been doing it through 2017, 2018, 2019. There are no new entrants to the market. We've picked up a lot of business from other hauliers that simply don't want to touch groupage. But this is the lifeblood. In fact, if you look at it in terms of the product cycle or the service cycle, this is the babies being born and entering the market that then grow into larger businesses, larger supply chains into Northern Ireland. Those products simply aren't moving. The feeling in GB is really clear. Why would I bother trying to do business with Northern Ireland? It's too complex, it's too costly, it takes too much time, and I'm trying to set up a new business. I can't really be bothered with that. So we've seen our groupage network being really curtailed back. Whenever I look at the SPS and I look at the challenges of SPS, it's absolutely remarkable to see Her Majesty's Government extending the SPS checks on goods from the EU entering GB until July next year. That tells me that the government has actually worked out that there's no credible threat to the UK food supply chain from products moving from the EU 27 to GB. Why did we have to introduce SPS checks between GB and Northern Ireland on day 1? To give you a clue around this, I got my first groupage process from our colleagues at DERA on the 31st of December at 2020 at 16:56 p.m. 4 minutes to go before the first day, in terms of working time, before the first shipments were being checked. But yet, the risk is so perceivably low that the checks into GB have been allowed to be delayed for a further 9 months. There must be a move towards mutual enforcement. It is the only way that time and cost and complexity can be removed from the supply chain. Northern Ireland operating as a third country to GB simply won't work for the type of distribution we do. Again, in a meeting we had with DEFRA in 2020, I called it out that if we had started with these rules, we would not have ended up with this distribution chain. We've now these rules enforced on us, and that is wrecking this distribution chain and this profile. There's no upside for Northern Ireland haulage, and there's no upside for Northern Ireland business that's trading with GB. The less movements there are between GB and Northern Ireland, the more pressure there is on Northern Ireland factories to get goods moved back to GB because they're simply removing capacity from the market. We're seeing a clear impact of the checks on factories because products are slower to get across the REC to the factories, which is making them slower to process at the factories, who are already dealing with COVID are already dealing with people shortages to work in their plants. We're seeing orders coming late out of those factories, trying to get back across GB, and it's just far too strained. So it is. To be honest, I could talk of pages that I could talk for days on this, but I'll follow Mark's and I'll follow Jeff's example, and I'll keep it to the point. Business survives by managing time, by managing cost, by managing complexity. All three of those things have been massively increased by the imposition of the Northern Ireland Protocol. When we're asked what is the alternative to the protocol, there's lots of alternatives. Effectively, goods flow in a circle, and GB has been able to mitigate against all the risks that the EU perceives coming from GB to Northern Ireland in their transactions. There are no checks going the opposite direction. Whenever we challenge that forward and we look at the benefits for Northern Ireland, we'll have to actually challenge ourselves and say, how are we going to check goods coming from the Republic of Ireland through Northern Ireland to GB? Are the checks going to be at Northern Ireland ports? What pressure is that going to put on Northern Ireland hauliers? I wrote to Christine Middlemass on the issue, and Christine Middlemass replied back by saying that due to the cumulative impact of HGV driver shortages, ongoing COVID supply chains, and the new requirements, that products of animal origin imports are being considered at senior level in government. Maintaining food supply flows into GB is a top priority. I would suggest to the Stormont Committee today that maintaining food supplies into Northern Ireland is a top priority for us, and that this cannot be done on a two-tier system where some people benefit from easements and other businesses don't. Our food service businesses, our general trade businesses, the lifeblood, the self-employed people, the small businesses in this economy are being hit most of this. The large retailers are being protected by easements, and it's also notable that several of the trade bodies that speak of ironing out some of the protocol problems have strongly welcomed that their sectors haven't been influenced or have had the easements extended on them, because they don't like what the future looks like whenever the easements are lifted. But I think we'll have to look at the future of all the small businesses in Northern Ireland. That's the lifeblood of our economy, and our major supplier, GB, our major market, GB, is extremely curtailed by the current protocol arrangements. I would extend a welcome to anybody that wants to come to McCullough, Ireland, that wants to see how the new processes work, because we can demonstrate how they work, we can demonstrate the technicalities, we can show you everything in terms of the time, the cost that's involved in making these work. I would especially welcome those people who think that this simply requires an airing out, because I think that it can be clearly seen, and it can be clearly seen from our Dublin operations, that if there were no easements in place, then it would be extremely visual to every consumer in Northern Ireland what the impact of the protocol has. At the minute, we're only seeing it in price stickers, but in the future, we're going to see it in availability and product quality, and it'll affect the poorest in society most. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time, and I'll come back to John.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed, Peter. Thanks very much indeed. John, would you like to just just sum up there, and then I'll open it up to the committee for questions.
Yeah, well, I think the three guests have covered everything extremely well. There's one thing I would add, is that a lot of the schemes that have been introduced by government to assist business to move product from GB, including the Trader Support Service, the Movement Assistance Service, and the Digital Assistance Services, those are all things that's been funded by government. Central government. However, that won't be funded forever. So what you'll see, if they remain in place, if the trading arrangements remain in place, there'll be considerable increase in costs, and that's over and above the additional costs with the additional bureaucracy and such like that we're already experiencing. So we've only seen the tip of the iceberg if this thing continues. And I say we do need fundamental change to ensure product can move freely going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much indeed. I'll just pass over to the committee now. So, Militia, you're up first.
Agus fáidir óbhalag, you're all very welcome, and thank you for your presentations as well. Funny, whenever we talk about costs and that, I think, would you probably agree with me that given Brexit, there was always going to be additional costs? In fact, I only would think on the Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, that when he said that he was quite prepared to live with the cost of 40,000 jobs, the loss of 40,000 jobs here in the north of Ireland, so that do you accept that with Brexit there was always going to be additional costs?
I think if I can come in there initially, in relation to the additional costs that Northern Ireland businesses and consumers are facing is as a consequence of the additional bureaucracy under the protocol as opposed to Brexit. We do most of our trade with GB, so there's a significant and disproportionate impact on businesses within Northern Ireland. The additional cost that we're experiencing in Northern Ireland is greater than what people in GB would be experiencing.
John, if I can just step in there for a wee second. Again, if I answer that question in the whole, because our vehicles obviously move in circles, they don't just move in one direction. And I would suggest very clearly, and I can demonstrate and make it very measurable, that the costs of moving goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is extremely more expensive than moving goods between the Republic of Ireland and GB, simply due to the level of checks, documentation requirements, and everything that's required to do those movements. And that those movements are being hampered by time, they're being hampered by complexity, whereas movements in the other way would not be hampered in that way. I think that the clear answer to that question would be some form of mutual enforcement would allow a lot of costs to be removed from the processes. Whenever we look at what the costs are actually being deployed in for SPS checks, not a single shipment, as far as I'm aware, has been turned back from Port of Larne, Port of Belfast, or Port of Warrenpoint because the product is unsafe. It's because documentation or a box wasn't ticked or something like that. They're the issues that we're finding. In fact, whenever you look at the fact that Lord Frost has extended the time for those checks to GB until July next year, that would demonstrate that there's no inherent risk to the GB food supply chain from the EU27. Why do we perceive there's a risk from the GB food supply chain coming across to Northern Ireland? That's where a substantial amount of the cost would be. Brexit was never going to be free. There were going to be some costs, but the costs that we are seeing are prohibitive. And the costs, the principle of the protocol was based around was that it wasn't to affect the people of Northern Ireland, it wasn't to affect the supply chains to Northern Ireland, and the costs are at the level that it is impacting both of those things.
Just on that same point, you know, that, and I know that just as you've made your presentation, and one implied all the disadvantages in that, say, of the protocol per se, but the protocol is a mechanism whereby they resolve difficulties within Brexit itself. Brexit bringing with it all of the additional problems that we're confronted with at the present time. So I contest that the protocol is there to facilitate and to allow both the EU and the British government themselves to resolve those difficulties. But if I might go on, because much is made here of supply lines and so on, as if there was something unique here in the north of Ireland and our lack of supply lines. In fact, you know, one can't help but remark just on the very fact that trade between the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland, both importing and exporting to each other's economies, has increased dramatically since the introduction of the protocol and the likes of it. But if I might go on in particular to John Martin. John, you actually said in January of this year, your organisation said that your local supply chain was a week away from collapsing. That was in January. Now, 9 months later, and here we are, and the supply chains in many respects are still intact, except for those supply chains that are suffering the same way in Britain, not in the north of Ireland uniquely, but in Britain itself from the result of Brexit. How do you feel about that, John? Do you think was your prediction last January it was way out of sync? Do you accept that the warnings in January were alarmist and they weren't based on reality?
My comments in January were based on the initial feedback from the sector in relation to the impact of the new trading arrangements. There was no clarity in relation to there was no information coming from government. So the sector was in turmoil, and the sector still is in turmoil. If you listen to the three representatives from three different sectors of businesses today, they will tell you that it's still in turmoil. They've had to make adjustments, they've had to make changes to their processes, but it's still in turmoil. There's still considerable costs. The government has introduced some schemes to try to ease in the new arrangements. Those schemes are time limited and funded by government. So there has been changes, there has been easements, and that has softened it slightly. But there's still considerable costs coming down the tracks. And in relation to the trade figures you quote, the trade figures are misleading, to say the least, and I'll maybe bring in Mark in relation to what his views are on the trade figures.
Yes, thank you, John. Just in relation to the north-south trade, I'm not saying it hasn't increased, but to some respects it has been somewhat displaced. Where previously GB to ROI trade would have been direct, savvy companies now that have depots both sides of the border are using Northern Ireland to move the freight. So it's not necessarily that the volumes of sales have increased in some respects, it's that the movement has just changed. And in some respects, it actually benefits, I touched what Peter said on earlier, it actually benefits somewhat companies in the Republic of Ireland more than companies in Northern Ireland, because any company in the Republic of Ireland at the minute, the fact that there are no checks at the ports in Belfast are simply moving freight up from Dublin or Cork or wherever out through the ports in Belfast into GB with no checks. Yet, on the other side of things, we bring freight from GB through Northern Ireland into the Republic, or even just from GB to Northern Ireland, we are subject to a mountain of bureaucracy. So your argument is, how is it fair on the company trading in Northern Ireland to have to do all that to bring it in, yet the company in the Republic simply ships their freight up through Belfast and is basically not subject to any checks at all as it currently stands?
Mark, just for I finish with my last question statement to you. You had actually alluded there to the fact that quite possibly that you're almost going to go out of business as a result of the protocol per se, and I would argue as a result of Brexit if you're faced with those consequences. But I always think too that business, and we've often heard this, business always gets a way around, whether it's over or under the obstacle or around the obstacle, but they deal with it as long as they have clarity and knowing what it is that they want to achieve and knowing what it is, the framework within which they have to work. Sorry that maybe you feel that you don't have that clarity, we'll say, at the present time, but I would think too that within the protocol itself you're more likely to maybe achieve that same type of clarity and its implementation as a result of the consequences of Brexit.
I'm sorry, I'll just do that in some respects. As what I alluded to earlier, we did a TSS meeting there 3 weeks ago, and if anybody, I'm not sure if anybody's actually used the Tier Support Service. I'm not sure if they've done any simplified frontier declarations, supplementary declarations, which I would not wish on my worst enemy. They are now pushing full frontier declarations towards us, which in effect means full customs declarations to move freight from GB to Ireland. We argued with them that that was simply not sustainable for companies of our size. And as I alluded to in my report, saying, look, there are big companies out there who compete against us, who have the staff that can do that door-to-door service, full frontier declarations, whichever. We cannot offer that service. We don't have the staff and we don't have the resources to hire those staff, because we don't, as Peter has said earlier, while there may be an increase in some movements, it's not an increase in turnover, so therefore we're not making any additional money. We're simply administering more costs, more bureaucracy. And unless we have the staff to deal with that, I want you to move goods from A to B, and can you do the full frontier declaration for me if that's what's coming down the line, and we say no, what does that customer do? They go to a competitor.
I think, Mark, just to follow on and agree with you there, I think that the key thing here for me is that in terms of our movements between GB and NI, we're being asked by the UK government to do things that the UK government can't replicate on movements between the EU and the GB. Okay? So we're being asked to do things between GB and NI that the UK government has had to further delay between between the EU and the UK. And just to pick up on the previous point of scaremongering, I think that that's probably an improper comment, because I would suggest that we were canaries in the coal mine, because we were highlighting the fact that if the continual pressure was put on the supply chain, that the supply chain would break. The fact that April Fool's Day, which was the first day that the fuel checks were meant to be put in place for supermarkets, has had to be delayed, and now has been delayed indefinitely, clearly demonstrates that there was a clear threat to the Northern Ireland food chain, to every consumer in Northern Ireland. And those two government movements have meant that our warning was listened to and heeded. It doesn't mean that our warning was incorrect, and subsequent warnings need to be heeded as well. But we were days away. I don't know how many hours people normally work on the trot, but I hadn't a day off, a single day off, in the first 3 months of this year, trying to keep this working. And that was based on the fact that we all seen a collapse on the 1st of April. And it took the government until the middle of March to actually see the same collapse, and now postpone it again indefinitely. So if that answers the question on where the challenges are coming from, we're being asked to do things in a time and space that nobody else can do, and we're being asked to do them against the backdrop of extension after extension, because whenever the government sees what's involved in them, they find that nobody else can do them either. That should answer the question in the whole, I believe.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Jim?
Chair, could I also just make a point on this as well?
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a politician, obviously. I'm a business person, and business follows the line of least resistance. And I think it actually worries me that a lot of commentators think that this is easy. I mean, Mark and Peter has very eloquently put forward the problems that we're with. I want to bring this back down to brass tacks. If you look at the supplementary declaration process, it has got 23 data fields. It's those 23 data fields and the application of those that it's causing a lot of the problem, or most of the problems that we are facing. Why is it so complicated? That's the question. Why is it that all goods coming into Northern Ireland, regardless of what is mentioned in the general press, and certainly in the cases of grain ounce, all our goods are subject to a supplementary declaration process, a full frontier declaration as well, despite the fact that the majority of goods will not begin in the Republic of Ireland? So my question in response is, why are we in this situation today? Why is it that we have not got this situation sorted out, whereby we can put in place workarounds, as has been suggested, so that 90% of my business coming in here does not have to go through a bureaucratic process that means nothing effectively to anyone? So while there are valid points on both sides, I think we need to look at the complexity of this current arrangement, which is bureaucratic, and it's more difficult than it needs to be. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, sorry, we're asking questions. We're not here to make political statements on this particular area.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your evidence, which is very stark and very clear. And unlike Mr McHugh, I'm not going to make light of it. I think it is, for business purposes, a life and death situation. It's quite clear to me it arises because of the absurdity of our biggest partner, GB, being decreed onto the protocol as a third country, a country of which we're meant to be a part, and yet because it has by the protocol been decreed a third country, it's like importing from Brazil rather than Bradford, and that, allied with the presumption that all goods are at risk of going to the Republic has created this intolerable situation. And that's not the result of Brexit, that's the result of the denial of Brexit, because the protocol leaves us not in the United Kingdom but in the EU as far as trade is concerned. But the point I wanted to ask you was, just to bring it home to us, if you can, what the practical differences are. Could you outline what it was like this time last year to bring in a load of goods from GB to Northern Ireland in terms of the administration, and what it's like today? And this is why we're still in the shallows of the protocol. We haven't got to the high water mark because of the grace period extensions, but could you demonstrate to us, just in understandable terms, what, if you're bringing goods from GB, is like today, administratively, bureaucracy-wise, as to what it was a year ago?
Okay, if we're going about foodstuffs, that's probably, I'm in a better place on that one. So a year ago, one of my major high street retailer selling foodstuffs and groceries would have placed an order with their distribution centre in Great Britain, be it in England, Scotland or Wales. That order would have been picked live from receipt of order on the same day. Our truck, which would have been the nearest and most efficient available vehicle, would have called in to lift those goods. Those goods would have been brought across to either our Dublin for Republic of Ireland or our Lisburn distribution centres and broke onto regional vehicles going to each of the counties for delivery on day 2, at a push day 3. Now the same company places an order. That order then goes into a preparation process for all the environmental health certificates to be created for the products. They actually struggle to pick the products in the warehouse because they have to pick them and store them whilst they're preparing the documentation. So it creates a work in progress. I have to declare which trailer number, which won't be the nearest available. It will be a trailer number that I've had to put into a parking position to make it available to that retailer to load their goods onto. That process takes up to around 6 days. We then have to give pre-notification on that vehicle, which is 24 hours. So you're in day 7 before it comes across. In day 8, where it may be subject to checks, which takes you to day 9 because it doesn't come off the boat in time to hit the county vehicles on day 10. If you take 10 days off the shelf life of most fresh produce, it simply doesn't work. If you take 10 days off the shelf life of frozen products, it has no major impact. So all we've done to frozen is add cost and delay, because the space on the shelf in the supermarket at that stage may have been emptied because of a warm weather event. The process is no longer reactive enough to keep that supply chain, to keep that shelf stacked, and simply just in times being removed. So in simple terms, Jim, I've worked that through to try and demonstrate to you. It's went from a day 2, day 3 process to a day 10 process, showing you each of the manageable steps. That's without there being a problem.
And who pays for that?
If there is a problem, and the trailer does get held, you now have 26 pallets of mixed picked product on that trailer, potentially 26 delivery points that are not receiving goods, even though only one of the pallets may have a problem on it. That will have to be stripped off. Typically, that product will be checked and found to be fine. I'll give you an idea of some of the products. All peppers, all chilies, all oranges coming from the EU, from GB to Northern Ireland, should be subject to 100% checks. Okay? So if there's a box of oranges in the bottom of any of those pallets, a box of limes, a box of peppers at the bottom of any of those pallets, according to the rules, they should all be physically checked. That trailer should be stripped. So at that point in time, you could be out into day 13, day 14 before that's done, given the facilities in Belfast.
And is that
if the rules are followed?
And is that not because any of those goods are at risk of going to the Republic, but because they're allegedly coming from a third country?
Yeah, well, Yes, it is because they're allegedly coming to the third country, but the complete paradox of that is that GB doesn't grow very many oranges, doesn't grow very many limes, doesn't grow very many peppers, and their source origin is typically EU. So what this is EU goods being checked, coming back into the EU from GB.
Yes. And who does the cost of all that fall on?
Ultimately, Jim, all costs fall on the consumer. Ultimately, the consumer pays the price.
And what is the impact of that on the long-term commitment of GB suppliers to Northern Ireland?
The impact on that is that, I'll say this again, the people who are moving products, especially grippage products, which I'm relating to there, between GB and NI, if that person is doing a national contract to supply England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, they are doing their utmost to get out of the Northern Ireland piece, because quite simply we are seen as too complicated, too costly and taking too much time.
Mark, did you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, I'll just pick up on the groupage model. Obviously we don't do SPS, which I have to say I've every sympathy for Peter that does. Again, prior to the 1st of January, basically we were a day 1 for day 2 stroke day 3 service. Customer could run us up in the morning, booked a job, we picked it up the same day, it was back in Belfast the following morning, and I delivered that day or delivered day 3, depending on obviously where it was going to. Now we spend day 1. We've told all customers since the start of April that there will be no collections done on day 1. We spend day 1 gathering the information from the supplier in GB, i.e. commercial invoices, etc., etc. We then complete our frontier declaration ourselves as a freight forwarder. If anybody's looked at it, we actually do what's called a consignment model. So we pass that consignment on to our haulage company or our network in GB that actually then physically ships the goods. Unfortunately, whereas previously, as I say, the collecting depot would have picked up the goods, they'd have shipped them up to the hub in the evening time, and then the hub basically would just have used their automated system to move the lorries, and that was merrily on its way to Belfast. As of January, that automated system is now defunct, as I have pointed out. We cannot utilise multiple lorries for the same goods. We cannot use that capacity on this physically on the lorries. So half-time the lorries are actually physically being shipped to Belfast in the sense only 3/4 full as opposed to capacity. So again, that adds cost because the cost of the shipping cost is the same, the fuel cost is the same. That all adds cost to the customer. One thing that annoyed us greatly was that the Trader Support Service was, advertised as a free-to-use service. So of course, all customers seem to have thought to us, well, this is going to be free. There's going to be additional costs here. But very quickly, after we saw it on the 17th of December, we knew right away this is not going to be a free service for us to administer. And we have some companies or networks in GB charging as much as £35–40 per declaration. So in other words, if one company moves 6 different pallets from 6 different suppliers, that can be an additional £40 per pallet through the network simply to use the TSS service. Now, as I say, the TSS is trying to push us towards full frontier declaration. If you were doing a full frontier declaration direct from GB to Dublin, your customs cost for export and import clearance would be roughly £100 per consignment. So you could, in effect, end up with it costing you more for the customs declarations than you could actually be paying to move the freight. And rather than currently being a day 1 for day 2, 3 service, as I say at the minute, again, where Peter comes from, if everything goes to plan, if there's no breakdowns, if you don't have to change anything, freight normally arrives in now day 3 stroke day 4, out for delivery day 5. That's just from a general grippage point of view.
Goodness me.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think it needs any more questions from me to demonstrate how unequal and unsustainable the situation is.
Okay, Jim.
Very, very, very useful. Though I see one of your contributors is in a shadow. He doesn't want too much fan mail from female watchers. So if you're out there, I would like to see you at some stage. Galway can see the dark shadow against the window. But being serious for a while. Am I right in believing that 94% of the goods that come from GB to Northern Ireland go no further? Is that figure correct? In other words, they don't go into the Irish Republic.
Mr. Wells, sir. Well, it has been calculated that roughly 75% of the freight coming from GB is for the Northern Ireland market alone, and that 95% of the freight coming from GB, regardless of where it goes, would not be subject to duties or tariffs anyway. Like, the whole argument was that the trade agreement was supposed to negate all duties and all tariffs, all quotas and all tariffs. So again, it comes back to the argument we're having to administer an awful lot of bureaucracy to capture probably 5% of the freight that possibly might attract duties crossing the border.
So our whole freight business has been held to ransom for 5% of the actual trade coming from England, Scotland and Wales. What would be wrong in my naivety in saying we'd stop that 5% coming in and tell them to bring it in by Dublin to Holyhead to Dún Laoghaire or whatever, and phase that out over, say, a 2-year period? In other words, hauliers would be given the option of diverting that trade from Stranraer or Canran to Larne or whatever, and going Holyhead to Dublin. What would be the impact if that was brought in to your industry?
I'll refer to Scotland there, because our general groupage service from Glasgow, we had a nightly service come across, and generally that tour had both. This is prior to January. I'll state that we had a tour coming across every night, and it was majority for Belfast, say 2/3 Belfast, 1/3 Dublin. So basically, I would have left Glasgow, come down to Stranraer, Canran, get on a boat, and offload it in Belfast the next morning, going down to Dublin and offload it. That now has to be, that Dublin freight we are now diverting via our Bradford hub from Bradford direct into Dublin. And that is adding time and cost. Again, I'm not sure whether the haulage industry as a whole would maybe support your argument there. I think the supply chains, north, south, east, west are so interlinked. As Peter says, everything moves in a circle. And I'm not sure that would necessarily work. I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but again, I don't know is the honest answer.
I think Mark, in addition to that, I would suggest that if we look at the supply chain between Scotland and the Republic of Ireland, it goes through Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. If we look at the supply chain between Northern Ireland and the south of England, it used to go through Dublin. It is now predominantly, and really predominantly, using and compressing the services on the Northern Irish sea routes from Larne, from Belfast, which is why most people can't get a booking on the boats now. So whenever we look at historical data, there is a sea change here. And the one thing that unfettered access, one thing that wasn't protected in unfettered access was movements from Northern Ireland through Port of Dublin to the south of GB, which is really important to our agri-foods business. Because they have to be able to hit southern English regional distribution centres on the same basis as their Scottish, Welsh and English and Irish competitors. Well, Northern Ireland basically hasn't got the access to Port of Dublin that we had in 2020 or 2019. Those are now taking a more costly route over the top, a more exposed route over the top from Larne. In answer to your question, Jim, some of this historical data is incorrect as we look forward. There has been a paradigm shift. So there has a third of our freight in agri-foods used to go through Port. That just isn't the case today.
But in the long term,
it isn't unfettered access.
Is there any evidence that people are bringing goods into Northern Ireland from Great Britain, claiming that they're for the Northern Ireland market only, and then shipping them into the Irish Republic, which is the fee of the EU? Is there any evidence that's happening?
Obviously, as haulage companies, we're asked to bring the freight from point A in GB to point B in Northern Ireland. Once we've delivered it, it's no longer our responsibility. I can't really honestly answer that question. I haven't seen it, and obviously, yes, we move freight for customers from GB through Northern Ireland into the Republic, and we are readily declaring that as doing so. I think that's our point, is that we're happy to do that, but why do we have to keep declaring the freight that is only for the Northern Ireland market?
Yeah, that's the crucial point, because obviously the vast bulk of this is never going to leak into the European Union. So are you not looking for some form of trusted trader status, whereby companies will declare, we will happily bring stuff from GB, but we will on the pain of death, make absolutely certain that we're not responsible for leaking into the EU, i.e. the Irish Republic. Is that plus a gradual moving of the smaller amount, the very small amount, that does go into the European Union, i.e. the Irish Republic, is that not the long-term solution rather than the protocol?
Again, I think, as we've all mentioned, mutual enforcement of standards is possibly the solution, because the trade agreement was supposed to do away with quotas and tariffs. So our argument is, why are we applying quotas and tariffs, or why are we doing bureaucratic customs declarations for track customs duties and tariffs? Yes, I suppose yes. The answer is that is the way forward.
And finally, are any of your hauliers involved in the importation of medicines from GB into Northern Ireland?
I have one company I work with, Mollusk, that did bring medical supplies in on a nightly basis from the Manchester area. And again, that used to be collect maybe 3-4 p.m. day one and delivered in Belfast 9-10 o'clock day two. And that's now again pushed out to sort of day 3, 4, 5 in some cases. And
what would the implications have been had as we had expected and may still happen, if the directive on medicines is implemented? Because I understand that 98% of our medicines come from the mainland. 98% of the medicines that are used in Northern Ireland come from the mainland. What would have happened had the government persisted with, the nuclear option of requiring them to go through the same process as other goods at the moment?
God only knows, I suppose, is the short answer. Well, thankfully, we haven't got to that situation. I think the government has seen sense to just extend that grace period indefinitely. I actually was reading an article this morning, I can't remember the organisation, that said even the proposals the EU has suggested of processing, checking and labelling in GB before they're shipped here will not work. Now, that's a Northern Ireland medical organisation. I think it might have been the Belfast Telegraph I was reading this morning, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But their argument is that the EU suggestion that they've come up with simply doesn't work either.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Jim, for outlining very clearly the position of the Ulster Unionist Party in our paper. But thank you very much indeed. Sorry, your invitation to join the party is in the post.
Political, sir.
This invitation's in the post. Right, sorry, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your evidence today. All of you, it's been useful. I appreciate that. Sadly, unfortunately, with our arrangements and Brexit, a hard Brexit generally, it was always going to be hauliers who had to deal with the brunt of new trading arrangements. So it will have been a very difficult year for all of you. Can I just touch on a couple of points? Peter, I think, raised the question of circularity and the circularity of east-west and north-south trade routes. And obviously, McCullough is north-south, east-west. You also mentioned, Peter, that the Port of Dublin was a critical point for moving goods from the whole island, including the Northern Ireland, to the south of England, including the big. I've forgotten the name of it now. The big in the Midlands, the big
Northampton.
What's it called, sir?
Northampton.
No, the big distribution hub that all the retailers use. Anyway, it's in the English Midlands somewhere. And the main place to get from here to the south of England would have been using the Port of Dublin. So I suppose, given that, my question is, I mean, Jim Allister raised the point about earlier this year, but this time last year, it's true to say that there is no this time last year for movement of goods, whether the protocol exists or not, where the point is that there was going to be disruption, and if the disruption wasn't
not from GB, there wasn't.
That's our third.
Well, the point is that given the fastest route to the south of England for goods in Northern Ireland is via the Port of Dublin, and the supply chains are circular, as has been said, there was no means by which the supply chains on this island and both islands would have been the same. So I suppose that's my question, Peter, is would the alternative without a protocol have been no disruption?
I think, Matthew, to clearly answer that question, without a protocol, the protocol refers to the movement of goods. It doesn't protect us from the movement of services. So as a haulier, we are treated as a GB haulier. We're only allowed to do 2 movements of cabotage, which means that's 2 collections and deliveries within the Republic of Ireland, or 1 if we cross over into the rest of the EU member states. So if you like, for me, as a haulier, the protocol does not protect our services. It only protects the movement of goods. So in answer to your question, the protocol has not protected the movement of goods through Port of Dublin from Northern Ireland. It has not given unfettered access from Northern Ireland through Port of Dublin, because there are all sorts of complexities required to do movements through that port, and I've highlighted those on numerous occasions through 2020 and through 2021. Effectively combining product going to the same English region from our Dublin collection points and our Lisburn collection points is just a complete minefield at the minute. So
agreed, but Dublin's in the EU. Dublin's in the EU.
The protocol allows the goods to move, but the hauliers are prevented.
Good. Peter, just for a point of clarity, you say, could you just go over the cabotage thing again? So they're allowed to do 2 pickups in the Irish Republic, or what's the cabotage rule again? Sorry.
I will just get. I'll ask John Martin just to come in to make sure, if you think, Mr. Chairman, that I get this absolutely right. John, could you just cover off cabotage?
Yes, no problem, Peter. And just to clarify, my camera isn't working. It's not that I want to hide my face or anything.
Don't worry about that.
There's a technical issue.
Don't worry, John. It's good. It's good. We're focusing on the information, not the. If we were judging people by appearances, then this finance committee would not be very well judged. But anyway,
speak for yourself.
Yes.
John,
no,
might be you.
Answer the question John, just before. Yes, you're allowed to do 2 cabotage journeys when you enter the south of Ireland.
John, just before you start. Sorry, excuse me. Just before you start, could you just quickly, very simply explain to the committee what cabotage is, because the cabotage thing is quite important. But I think unless you actually understand what it is, I don't think it sort of necessarily resonates. But that was a very important point that had been made slightly earlier. But go ahead.
Right. Well, cabotage is where a haulier who's registered in Northern Ireland and operates from Northern Ireland is allowed to go into an EU jurisdiction, either laden or unladen, and pick up a load within that jurisdiction and deliver that load within that jurisdiction. In other words, an internal movement within another country. A Northern Irish haulier going into the south of Ireland is allowed to do 2 of those within a 7-day period and come back out again.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that the protocol would be better if it had allowed additional cabotage for Northern Irish hauliers to do pickups in the south? To do more often?
The protocol doesn't address, Matthew, services.
I know that. I know, but
the protocol simply doesn't address services.
I agree, Peter. It's one of the things would have liked to have been in the protocol. I think we should do. Do you think it would be, from your perspective, would you like to see more on that, whether it's in the protocol or in a separate agreement? You would like to see more in terms of services agreement for your business in the EU?
Well, for clarity, with the Republic of Ireland operator's licence and the Republic of Ireland depot, it will be of no advantage to me whatsoever. Okay.
Just on another point, which is around the something the RHA has been campaigning on at a UK level, John, I don't know, is around supply of drivers. That's a particular challenge in Britain. Is that a challenge here as well?
Yes, I think, Matthew, it's a challenge across the whole of the EU, but particularly within Northern Ireland, and as Peter has alluded to, the slowing down of the supply chain has created additional capacity issues and has impacted on drivers.
Okay, and but in terms of in Britain, it's to do with part of the shortage is to do with their ability to work in Britain.
Yes, but it's not the sole issue in relation to the availability of EU workers. There's a whole raft of issues, IR35, the slowing of the supply chain, people not being attracted into the sector, etc. So there's a whole range of issues that needs to be addressed. It's just not to do with the unavailability of EU workers.
But that's certainly. I mean, if I'm reading the RHA, that is one of the issues. Is that you're right? It's IR35. There are clearly others, but one of them is the new post-Brexit immigration rules and people and drivers not being able to work in the UK. That's one of them.
Yes, you're 100% correct, Matthew. Yes.
Which is obviously not in the protocol. Anyway, that's been really helpful, and thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Matthew, sorry, if I could just add to the driver issue. Again, people movements aren't in the protocol, and our Northern Irish factories that we draw from every day, I'm trying to think of a single one that hasn't told me I have a people problem. So although the protocol does allow goods to move freely to the EU and to GB from Northern Ireland, you have to be able to produce those goods. And at the minute, our factories are starving of people to produce goods. And that means that some of the benefits that people perceive the protocol has just aren't actually there at all, because companies and factories are struggling to satisfy their existing GB markets to repeat the previous year, never mind take advantage of some new market conditions.
Completely
so again,
agree, Peter. Yeah.
That is where the protocol fails completely, in that it is only for the movement of product, and it inhibits the supply chain and people movements to Northern Ireland.
But, sorry, Peter. Just to be clear, that's not the protocol. That's Brexit, because the protocol is just about movement of goods. You're saying that what you're saying is that the protocol doesn't include provision for Northern Ireland to have different immigration rules to the rest of the UK. That was never on the table. That's not. It's not. I mean, I agree with you that that's a real problem for our economy. I totally agree, and I also agree that moving goods into Northern Ireland, I want to see it more seamless. But it's not the protocol's fault that the UK made the decision to stop free movement of people. That's the fact that that's not in the protocol is a separate question. No one was ever putting that on the table. The Irish government. No one ever suggested that. I mean, it may be one that the UK government, in my view, you're right, should negotiate for all of us. The whole UK is free movement, but that was. It would seem strange to pick that out as a failing of the protocol.
So sorry for clarity, Matthew.
Sorry, Peter. Peter, just
here on this then. I'm suggesting that the movement of goods and the market opportunity that's presented through the protocol isn't actually there, because our factories can't produce the extra volumes.
Okay.
Because of the rest of the Brexit arrangements.
Okay.
And that is in the protocol, and that's the carrot that the protocol dangles in front of Northern Ireland manufacturers, that you can ship to GB, that you can ship to EU, whenever in reality you have to be able to make the goods before you ship them.
Okay, good. Well, I appreciate everyone's evidence, and it has genuinely been useful. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Sir, Pat?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks John, Mark, Jeff and Peter.
Excuse me.
I'll lay where I come from. I mean, I campaigned against the whole Brexit at the start of it, because I wasn't sure we knew exactly what or where or how we were coming from or what we were all voting for at that time. And some of the outworkings is here today. I am a politician now, but a lot of my previous life was spent in business and within Belfast. So I do understand, especially Mark, when you're a small business, the pressures that you have no control over and how they affect you. And I'm genuinely concerned, after listening to what you've said here today, about the strains that is putting on your business. However, just to recap, the EU, it's particularly concerned about the purity of its single market and predominantly to keep its internal barriers in check. Because if they don't do that, it means that every one of those other members will collapse and remove from it. There are over like 300 regulations, but it is a belief of mine as well to the British government that when they brought out their detailed assessment of all of their implications, which they never shared publicly, indeed that is on the UK NI, the heart of the protocol. The UK NI, the internal market for the United Kingdom, have they ever shared that or offered to share their findings on that with anyone or anyone from from business? Because I have never seen any of it. That's the first question. I just want to do a few more little small questions to you. The other bit I'd like to ask is, we had a gentleman here, David Henry, from the European Centre, and he explained the product and the services and the regulations, but he also stated that there was a leverage for Northern Ireland hauliers for duty or for diesel, or how that affects, that there was a reclaim and a rebate for that. So the question is, can the Road Haulage Association comment on the evidence suggests that access to essential user rebate for fuel has been secured for Northern Ireland? And might that be a reason why we're finding that trade route? I hear the other parts of your trade route. Does that count for all fuel going through Scotland, England and down into Wales? And then the last bit, can you at least tell me the opportunities for the RHA, what you see out of that protocol and where we're going to move in order to try and fix the protocol, because it's not going away, but we need to fix it, and we can only do that all together and highlight the concerns which you have done here today. Thank you.
If I could come in, Chairman, there in relation to the fuel excise duty. As a consequence of the UK leaving the European Union on the 1st of January, all UK hauliers lost entitlement to claim a fuel excise rebate as a consequence. We have reviewed the detail of the protocol and realised that there was a significant issue here, particularly on the island of Ireland, where you had hauliers competing with Irish hauliers, and they were at a disadvantage because they weren't able to access the fuel rebate scheme. As a consequence of lobbying on behalf of members, lobbying the Southern Irish Government, the British Government and the European Commission, we were able to secure entitlement to that rebate for Northern Irish hauliers only at a European level. So the European Commission have accepted there is an entitlement which is under the protocol. However, each member state that participated in the scheme must accept that. And at this moment in time, there's only 2 countries have acknowledged that they're going to reinstate it for Northern Irish hauliers, and that is Belgium and Southern Ireland. I say we're still engaging with HMRC, who are working on our behalf to lobby the other participating countries to ensure that Northern Irish hauliers continue to have that entitlement, and that entitlement is worked through provisions of the protocol.
Okay, and just one last one, Chair. Again, just to go into what Peter had said there about Peter, that you have 2 licences, one in Northern Ireland, one in Southern Ireland. I'm wondering how difficult that is, and is that a way in order to get round? You can go in and out as often as you can when you have that licence. Do you need to have a depot in the south, or is that a way over those two-run rule that you spoke of earlier?
Well, we run a distribution centre in Ballymount in Dublin. So our Republic of Ireland deliveries are made via Ballymount, and our Northern Ireland deliveries are made via Lisburn, and we trunk vehicles between the 2 depots. So basically there's bulk movements between the 2 depots, but they go on to regional vehicles going out into the counties. And it's a model that existed pre-Brexit. It's a model that existed, well, maybe not from McCull Ireland, but it's a model that existed before the UK entered the EU in the first instance as well. So it's a basic trunking system. I think what we've actually seen is that the trunking system between UK depots and Northern Ireland is actually where the fractures are here, because those normal movements from Glasgow to Belfast, from Edinburgh to Belfast, from Liverpool to Belfast, those normal movements are now abnormal, even within UK jurisdiction.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, can I just answer Mr. Catley's first point about protecting the EU single market? And the Northern Ireland Protocol clearly states that it's there to protect the EU single market, but it's also there to respect the UK's internal market. So from my point of view as a freight forwarder and a delivery service, I'm administering all the rules to protect the EU single market but get no benefits from the UK's internal market at the moment. And you're asking about what are the benefits are going forward. I don't see currently, from my point of view, any benefits going forward. Again, suggestions have been made in terms of mutual enforcement rather than this rigid bureaucracy. That is to us the way forward for this, because simply we cannot continue to apply rules here in Northern Ireland that's not being applied anywhere else in the UK, just to move goods into a small regional economy. The system simply isn't designed for that. So
can I go back to just Mark? We met with Professor Hayward, and she argued that the bureaucratic and logistical issues experienced by NI traders was largely a consequence of the wider policy position associated with the UK's withdrawal from the EU, and particularly the United Kingdom's government decision to exit the EU customs union. This was argued was further complicated by the passage of the UK INA, the internal bill, which served as a political distraction to the practical process of easing administrative burdens associated with the protocol. So it probably points back to Her Majesty's government.
Right, okay.
Well, we can only work with what we have in front of us here. I can't speak for the UK government much as sometimes you'd love to.
But I like to put the blame where the blame should sit, Mark, as well. Thank you.
No, I am on that, Mr. Callahan. All I'm saying is we're working with a system that simply doesn't work for us. You're asking what the solutions are. We're sort of saying, look, please define what that risk is to us, because at this moment in time as a employer, everything is at risk to us, simply to protect the EU single market. That's to say, we get no benefit from the UK's internal market at that stage.
Okay.
From my point of view, whether it's a protocol or Protocol 2.0, it makes no difference to us as long as it works. The argument we're simply saying is, please remove the paperwork and the bureaucracy that we do not need to do and should not have to do, and we will happily administer the bits that we do have to do.
Mark, I am with you on this, and I am in complete agreement with what you have said. We need to get it sorted out and make it easier. And at the start of it, I told you I was in business myself, and it's great when you have the things that you can control and you can work for your business. But there are stuff here which is completely outside all of our controls at the moment.
Oh, I appreciate that, yes.
Okay, thanks. Keith?
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation, and it's been very informative. Over this past number of months, nearly years, all I've been hearing is implementation in full. And today I heard the words car crash, groupage is on its knees, wreck in the distribution, SBS is a nightmare. So I don't know how those two square, implementation of the protocol in full. I just don't know how that squares. That said, obviously the grace periods have been extended, and I think Jim Wells touched on this briefly a wee while ago there. If those grace periods weren't extended and they were to be implemented, for example, tomorrow, what would that do to your industry and the work you carry out day to day?
Well, from my point of view, I suppose that the light touch regulation that we're supposed to have, which I really don't consider as light touch regulation, is that there are probably 1 in 10 trailers or groupage pull for checks. If every single trailer is then pulled for checks, then again that pushes our service out from, was it day 1, day 2 service to now day 4 or 5 to probably closer to what Peter's talking about, maybe a week, 8, 10 days in some cases, depending on when goods are collected. All it's doing is causing more and more delays unnecessarily, as far as I'm concerned.
Does any of the rest of you want to comment on that?
I'll come in on that as well, if you don't mind. From again, we would manufacture the trailers that the hauliers would use. We're trying to plan manufacturing, and on the basis of what Peter and Marcus said, it becomes almost impossible to manufacture in Northern Ireland because you don't simply know when you're going to get your product. So there's definitely no benefits. Although this is mainly looking at hauliers today, there is a knock-on effect into manufacturing and other businesses as well. It will come to the point where being a Northern Ireland manufacturer is going to really become a backwater. That basically we are not going to be able to compete with our GB compatriots who don't have to go through the bureaucracy that we're having to go through. And it's not maybe going to be this year, it's maybe not going to be next year, but I think if I was a manufacturer looking at coming into Northern Ireland, I'll clarify that by saying a manufacturer who's mainly tied into the GB market, I would certainly have second thoughts about setting up in Northern Ireland at the moment.
I think if I could come in there briefly in relation to the haulage sector, people have to realise that the haulage sector is highly efficient, just in time, low profit margins type industry. The effect of the new trading arrangements has completely blown that model apart to the extent that it's highly inefficient, more costly, and not just in time. And then the added cost will have to be passed on to the manufacturing base and the consumer. If it's added on to the manufacturing base, it means that our products that we're selling, be it internally within the UK market or further afield, it means that we may be more expensive or too expensive in relation to the products we produce. So it has a knock-on effect on the overall economy.
John,
I think that the answer is really clear, and that the fact that Great Britain has postponed all the checks, all the SPS checks coming from the EU to GB until at least July next year, because it was a threat to the food supply chain coming into GB. That's Lord Frost's comments. I don't think we know any better than him. I think that's the perceived threat that has to be seen coming the other way too.
Well, just one final question, if I may, Chair. Yeah, I think John Martin, you referred at the start, John, about the command paper. What's your thoughts on Olia's, your opinion on the command paper and what it brings to the table or doesn't? Would that solve, or the percentage of that solve a lot of your problems?
We were one of the few trade bodies that actually welcomed the command paper. I welcomed because of the content and the fact that the UK government is trying to force a resolution to ensure that the difficulties that we're experiencing are dealt with. This is now the middle of September. We're 9 months into this, and there's still no movement. And I appreciate people have said that I said at the very outset that the industry was about to collapse. Yes, it was, but there has been easements and there has been adjustments and there has been some more information, but we're still under severe pressure, and certainly we see the command paper as, as a move forward to try to bring resolution to the issues.
It doesn't solve.
I would endorse, if I could, I would endorse John's comments on that. I think I said earlier that I think the command paper is an excellent framework for moving forward. I have one disagreement with it, and that's in paragraph 77, when it talks about a standstill. I think, yes, we need a standstill at this minute in time, but that standstill cannot be an indefinite standstill. We need to get to a stage where we're starting to implement what this says, what the command paper says. I honestly do not want to face 2022 with no changes, and I would just really implore our politicians right across the board to try and move forward, and let's get these easements put into place that makes doing business better for the good of all people in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's just disappointing that some aren't hearing the message, whether it's today or every day, because there's not one day in the office I don't get contacted regarding issues, and that's from all across Northern Ireland. So we talk about COVID bubbles. I think some people's in a protocol bubble, and it's not about politics. They just don't get it, that the damage it's causing day on daily. Either they're not listening or they don't want to hear. But I'm certainly listening, and our party will not be wanting in this. As you
that's a political statement.
Sir,
but a good one, Chair. A good one.
Well, it doesn't matter. It's not the place for
sorry, gentlemen. Gemma, over to you. You never guess there's an election coming up, would you?
Thank you, Chair.
Hi, Gemma.
Thank you all for your presentations. Most of my questions have been answered, but following on from Matthew's line of questioning around the EU labour market and leaving it and the impact that has had on the availability of drivers. There have been many reports recently about the terrible pay and conditions that many haulage drivers have had to endure. what are your own experiences of this, and what can be done to tackle this issue? I'm the Sinn Féin spokesperson on workers' rights, so that's why I'm taking a particular interest in this.
Well, I think if I can comment generally from the Road Haulage Association's perspective, we would accept that, yes, there has been an issue in the past in relation to drivers' conditions that they have to endure at regional distribution centres, the availability of services at service stations, and in relation to the rates of pay. But you will note, I'm sure you picked it up through the local press and the national press, where HGV drivers' rates of pay are now rising to the extent that they're now paid more than lawyers. So things are changing. Things had to change, but say things are moving in the right direction. But I think the haulage sector generally was undervalued by everyone, from the consumer right through to business. But I think that has changed, partly as a consequence of COVID and partly as a consequence of the lack of drivers, and they've had to promote the industry to try to attract new blood coming into the industry.
John, can I just add to that? And Gemma, I think this is an important point that people in your position can drive forward for us. I'm only in this sector 5 years. In this sector, I see women less represented than in any other sector that I've ever worked in. The conditions for drivers on the roads are so poor regarding services, service stations and things like that both the UK and Ireland need to massively invest in that facilities. We need to tap into the 50% of the workforce that are just. You see some of the work we've done and some of the programmes RHA's done and McCullough have been involved in trying to attract women into the sector. But definitely, whenever we're talking to ladies and we're saying, why won't you stay in the sector? It's the conditions on the road. It's the lack of services on the road. If you get into one of the new trucks, it's better than any caravan, any car you'll ever be in. They're air cooled, they're microwaves in them, kettles, everything like that in them, but they still can't provide for the fact that we have inadequate services for drivers, especially women drivers, on the roads, and that really does need political meat put behind it, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm glad to hear that there are steps being taken to address this, and I do think that COVID did shed a light on how vital and how important haulage drivers are, so thank you for that, and that's my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma. Philip?
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate all the information you've provided. It's been a long and interesting evidence session. I certainly have sympathy for any individual or business that has suffered as a result of Brexit. How could you not? And I understand that as business people, you don't want to come here and get caught up in politics. I do feel that I have to respond to Keith's commentary about the DUP listening. Because all that we're talking about here today isn't just a result of Brexit. It's a result of the hard Brexit forced upon the people of the North who didn't support any kind of Brexit by Gemma Alistair of the TUV and the DUP. That's the reality of it. Protocol, whether we like it or not, is there to protect in some ways against the biggest excesses of that. And I do understand, and not disputing the evidence that people have been caught up in the crossfire of that. So I just think that point needed to be made. In terms of mutual, because I know...
Philip, do you have a question rather than a party political broadcast? I think we're all making them today because of this particular time of the year. But have you got a question?
You just interrupted me when I got to my question.
Go ahead, Philip.
Mutual enforcement has been raised a few times today. But from my looking at it and from the sources that I've read about it, it's kind of already been thrown out as completely unworkable. It doesn't work, or it isn't used anywhere else. And I don't think the EU could trust the British. Just given the way the British government have behaved throughout this whole process, how could you trust the British to carry out an agreement in such a thing. So, I mean, I just don't see how mutual enforcement is workable. We have got the UFU coming next, and I was going to ask them about their position in relation to a comprehensive and bespoke SPS agreement between the EU and the British. So I wouldn't mind hearing your views on that particular solution. And then secondly, I mean, also personally and the party, we're hearing of reports from some cross-border haulage companies that could soon be losing their rights to operate in the south of Ireland because they have designated transport managers that reside here in the north. So I'm just wondering, is that a problem that you have experienced yourselves or know of others who have experienced, and maybe you can elaborate on that one?
Well, Philip, if I take your first question on the mutual enforcement, and it doesn't work anywhere. It actually does. At the minute, a lorry load of, say, chicken from the Middle East can enter the EU via Port of Rotterdam. We checked in the EU at Rotterdam, enter the EU market, move across into Ireland to a distributor, move to a distributor in Northern Ireland, and then move from Northern Ireland across to the GB unfettered. So the UK is trusting the EU to mutually enforce and trusting its SPS regulations to do that. There will be no further checks on that product moving through Northern Ireland to GB, and that happens day in and day out. So there are models where mutual enforcement can be clearly seen to work. Unfortunately, the same piece of chicken can't move back from GB to Northern Ireland again to a restaurant without a health cert, but it can move from Rotterdam through the EU 27 through Northern Ireland to GB. So to a degree, the UK government, in postponing further the SPS checks, is relying on a mutual enforcement standard with the EU.
Yeah. On the second question, Sir Peter?
I can come in on the second question in relation to transport managers. Yes, you're right in relation to a transport manager residing in Northern Ireland having a UK transport manager CPC. If he didn't exchange that CPC prior to the 31st of December, then he has to resit the exam in Southern Ireland. In addition to that, if he lives in Uri and he's working for a company in Dundalk, that's not acceptable. He has to live in the jurisdiction as well. So there is a serious issue there. I have written to the Southern Irish Government. I've got a response back late last week, which I still have to consider. But from initially reading it, they are saying that there's no movement because they're just applying EU rules, which has caused significant difficulty, particularly for people around the border areas or anybody that feels that they're Irish and have an Irish passport. It doesn't cut it with the Southern Irish Government.
Okay. You happy, Philip?
On that last point, I mean, is it something that the EU could show a bit of flexibility on? Would that solve the problem?
Yes, certainly. I think it would, particularly on the island of Ireland, if they're showing some flexibility. But there's a number of people have contacted me with that particular circumstance where they're living around Uri and they're a transport manager for a Southern Irish company. The authorities in the south are saying they must reside in the south, even if they have exchanged their CPC prior to the end of December. So their Southern Irish government appear to be saying that it's an EU rule and they have no flexibility. But I'm quite happy to pick it up with you after this meeting if you so wish.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Are you happy, Philip?
Yep, I mean, nobody kind of commented on the support or otherwise of a comprehensive SPS agreement and how that would maybe help and assist some of the problems that have been discussed here today.
Okay.
Sorry. Well, I can just, it's probably a question for Peter, but from Jeff's perspective, my perspective, we don't need an SPS, so therefore, regardless if there is an SPS agreement, it won't help us in any shape or form.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed, John, Mark, Jeff and Peter, for your evidence. Look, just before we finish, Mark, Just a final question from me. I was reading your written evidence, and I think it's for our within our packs. It's at page 52, and it's paragraph 4, and says, "How has all this affected us personally?" And actually reading that, has really brought it home to me what the situation is like. And when I just read your words, when I say I can speak for every one of my staff as well as myself to say that we're physically, mentally and emotionally exhausted. I have never worked under such pressure and stress like it ever before. I think that is the most fitting piece of testimony I've heard in this committee, and for that indeed I thank you, and I think it's worthy that we make sure that everybody is aware the stresses and strains that the road haulage industry and yourselves particularly are under. But again, from me personally and also from this committee, thank you all very much indeed for your evidence, and I think that is a very powerful piece of testimony. But thank you very much indeed, and be safe all of you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
If we move on to the next item on the agenda, item number 9, it's our oral briefing from the Ulster Farmers Union, and have we got David and James on the system? Hi David, hi James, can you hear us?
Yeah. Yes, hear you clearly.
Good to see you. Good to see you again. This particular part of the briefing is again on the Northern Ireland Protocol. We'll receive an oral briefing from the Ulster Farmers Union. Clark's briefing note is at page 100. The Ulster Farmers Union submission is page 113. I'll just say that the session has been recorded by Hansard. Who's going to speak first? Davy, is it going to be you?
Yeah, it is indeed, Steve. Thank
okay.
you,
good to see you again. Davy, can you crack on, please? Thanks.
Yes. Look, I suppose just to take a bit of background very briefly, obviously following the withdrawal agreement, Northern Ireland, as you know, was left as part of the UK customs territory, but the only part of the UK that remains in the EU regulatory zone. So we were, I suppose, fundamentally, even from back in December of last year, aware that there were issues were going to come along. I'm going to cover, I suppose, some of those specific issues, and James is then to come in more widely on perhaps the possibility around some of the aspects which, concerns policy for UFU indeed, and decisions that even some of which have been mentioned in your earlier road haulage folk presentations. I think, to be fair, we've had probably warm words and reassurances, at a level from Lord Frost, from Mariusz Sefcovic. But in reality, I think probably back in the early part of this year, our President, Victor Chestnut, was on a meeting with his colleagues across in Brussels, where both Michel Barnier and indeed the Chief Vet were on that meeting, and the Chief Vet in that instance basically said, tell your farmers there will be no flexibilities on the protocol. And I guess I'd have to say from the 1st of January we had aspirations and hopes that there would be negotiation and discussions around particular points within it that were causing consternation and difficulties for the agricultural sector. And I'm going to give you a few examples of those. I suppose the first one, which was being fairly well highlighted even before we got to the 1st of January, was around the fact that we had hill sheep, particularly. There are around 9,000 sheep bought by Northern Ireland farmers in Scotland each year. They're breeding sheep. They're brought across after the 1st of January. That subsequently, when Brexit happened, could not take place as a result of a combination of things. One being that there are controls in the EU relating to scrapie, a particular sheep disease. The sheep have to be tested for that. That can't happen until they're a year old, effectively. So, in effect, if they're born in 2020, it couldn't happen until 2021. Those sheep were basically stuck in Scotland and remain stuck in Scotland 9 months later. We have one farmer with over 400 sheep. He has reached a point where he has no option, basically, but to take those from the Scottish holding that were, I suppose, doing bed and breakfast and caring them for him, and return them to the marketplace in GB, because he cannot get them into Northern Ireland. And we equally have had farmers who have approached us coming towards the autumn sales just in recent weeks, asking the same question. Has this been sorted out? Can I go over? Can I buy those sheep this year? Sorry, the answer to that is still no. And I think that's one of the ones that, as I say, was there in advance. We knew it was going to be a problem. Again, we hoped that there might be some resolution before we got to the autumn sales this year. Changes in livestock identification was another example. That basically was around the idea that any animals, cattle, bovines coming across into Northern Ireland from GB would have to have their tags, which is obviously the means of identification, removed. That is a strange request, I have to say, given, obviously down through the years our own department here has been quite adamant.
David,
about
say again, they have to take the tags off the cattle?
That is the rules, yes. The tags would have to be removed and replaced then with a Northern Ireland tag. So in effect, you are, to all intents and purposes, losing the traceability. That is a particular problem for the pedigree sector, because the pedigree sector, in terms of the animal identification, that is also part of that pedigree traceability. And I mean, those animals are DNA tested and all the rest of it, and suddenly we were being asked to remove those tags. Now, to be fair, our own department argued against that, and to date, that button was pushed pause. It's not resolved, but in reality, it seems a ludicrous state of affairs to have arrived at. The other thing, and it brings me back to on the pedigree cattle, we have, and not just pedigrees, but any animals coming from GB to Northern Ireland would have to have a 6-month residency period. We have quite a substantial pedigree businesses here in Northern Ireland that would trade regularly with GB. They would bring those animals across in normal circumstances, not only to shows such as the Welsh Show, the Highland Show, Yorker Show and other shows, in order to raise their profile. That's their, I suppose, shop window. But also we would bring them then to the sales, for example, in sterling. And I'll just give you a few figures. In 2018, there were 109 bulls at the spring sterling sale from 43 exhibitors or farmers. The 2019, there were 120 from 37. 2020, it was disrupted because of COVID, didn't happen. But in 2021, we went from, as I say, around 120 to, from 40 exhibitors, we went to 4 bulls from 3 exhibitors. And that is simply down to the fact that once those animals go over there for sale, if they're not sold or are unable to be sold, they cannot return for a 6-month period. So it has done away completely with the opportunity of our pedigree breeders to have that shop window in GB. It has also done away with the shop window that they would have had in order to bring those bulls across to likes of the Highland Show and the different shows to promote them. Horticulture, completely different sector, but in reality you probably were aware back in the early part of the year there was discussion around soil on plants. I think one of the things that highlighted it for me was my own family here. My wife actually asked the question of me back around about early March. Why can I not get bulbs and different plants that you used to order online? We went online and looked up, and I was able to tell her I think it's probably because of Brexit, and sure enough it was. But I just went online prior to this meeting to take a look at the website for that business, and without promoting it, I just read you a couple of lines of what it says in there. It is with a heavy heart I'm writing, it's still the same 9 months later, I'm ready to let you know that for the time being we will be no longer able to deliver orders to Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, the cost of doing so, with all the phytosanitary, and that's the SPS checks the other guys have been talking about there, the cost and complexity of these checks make it impossible for us. And therefore, Northern Ireland will continue, as Northern Ireland continues to be part of the EU plant health territory, we will no longer be part of that of the rest, and will no longer, be part of that of the rest of the UK. So that distinction had made, and we certainly had horticulture businesses in the start of the year that were in real dire straits because they could not get the produce and the plants that they needed. And I think it probably, when that came down to individual householders and families ordering things online and so on, including plants, suddenly they became much more aware of the difficulties that existed in getting produce. We also had the issue of soil and machinery, and that was a particular issue for machinery businesses and dealers bringing in machinery from GB to Northern Ireland. Now, it is fair to say that the UK took unilateral action in relation to that. That was received with some angst, I would say, from the EU side. Fundamentally, they were very upset with that, I suppose, if I put it bluntly. But it was really, I suppose, at that point, a case of these businesses are going to close down and not exist if some action wasn't taken. So we then have plant protection products, the sprays and so forth that are needed to protect and keep safe the plants that we grow, the vegetables, and indeed the arable. And I think one of the examples of that which arose this summer was around a particular spray called Topiki, which is used by carrot and vegetable growers and indeed seed potato growers in order to protect against aphids. Aphids which would bring a bacteria which would basically destroy that crop. And it was, the EU decided that it was no longer going to be available. It's still available in the UK, but it was an example of that diversion starting to happen, where suddenly something which we had been able to use to supply into the GP retail supermarkets and was still eligible to be used under EU rules, it was no longer allowed to be used. And that caused a lot of consternation in trying to source something that would replace it. That wasn't possible at the time. So all of that in relation to plant protection products and the changes that are taking place in terms of the regulatory environment around that. Another example are veterinary medicines. We're probably well enough aware of human health and the issues that have been raised in recent weeks around the drugs that we need for human health, but equally veterinary medicines, that they're, I suppose, fall into that same category with concerns there that in terms of animal welfare and the drugs and treatments that we need, that as we continue to diverge, those things will be more difficult to source and in fact in some instances will not be available anymore in Northern Ireland. I think probably one of the other things which again we were well aware of, and this is my final point before I hand over to James, was around rules of origin. That particularly has, I suppose, pertains to the milk sector, many other sectors as well, but the milk sector particularly with 2.4 billion litres of milk produced in Northern Ireland, 1/3 of that being transported across the border for processing, mainly by the likes of Lakeland and Glanbia, those big companies that are based in south of Ireland. And the fact that the product that they produce from that, be it cheeses, be it powders, milk powders, whatever it is, all the different range of powders, is basically known as a product of mixed origin. That is not a good place to be when you put something on the shelf. And in effect, that too needs resolved, because I think the Irish government are particularly concerned about that one too, because it has implications for their own businesses in the south of Ireland. They would like to see that resolved at an EU level, but to date it has not been resolved. So in summary, the issues that existed on the 1st of January still exist. And that is perhaps, where our farmers get extremely frustrated. Their expectations probably maybe were too high, that there would be common sense, that there would be discussion, that there would be some level of compromise. But and I hope that we can move to that point. But going back to that comment by the Chief Vet back earlier in the year, it didn't give us much comfort that basically, as far as he was concerned, tell your farmers there won't be any flexibilities. So I'm hoping there will be flexibilities, because these things that don't work need fixed. But I'll hand over to James. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, David. James.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you everyone for inviting us on today. I'd focus on sort of the key general principles of what we're looking for here in Northern Ireland as the Ulster Farmers Union. Was that stability, certainty, simplification, and looking at the costs. I'll focus on a few points that I was listening into the RHA when they were in there earlier on. I'll focus on a few points that were raised and parts of some of those questions. Trusted trader come up. We need to look certify an audible supply chain. So look at green channel ports based on sort of low risk level of goods entering Northern Ireland. And then we need to encompass, like as possible, a group of goods and traders from food to right throughout the agri-food supply chain. In terms of veterinary agreement, Wigan raised that one earlier on, I suppose, and I'll cover that now. A veterinary agreement could remove up to 80% of checks and documentation that otherwise would be needed. It would help support the agri-food sector, and that includes farming and keeps costs down. We realise there is divergent opinions on the precise contents of such an agreement, whether that be time limited, would it assist in the short and medium term. But it certainly would minimise friction in conducting trade. You have the Swiss style approach. It's one way of doing that. It's not the only way of doing that. But it would be helpful if both the government and the EU recognise the unique starting point between both parties and keep friction as minimal as possible, and negotiate advanced equivalence mechanisms that allows basically trade to flow as freely and with as few administrative burdens as possible. It was mentioned earlier on about at risk as well. I mean, it has now become a barrier to trade, and I suppose it has put some businesses in an unsustainable position. I mean, the definition of at risk is far too wide. For instance, I mean, if we look at the arable sector, businesses in the arable supply chain are starting to report difficulties in basically sending GB grown grain to Northern Ireland for further processing, whether that be for milling or for animal feed. And that falls under basically an at-risk category and requires significant customs requirements and paperwork. This could lead to businesses moving away from Northern Ireland, processing in Northern Ireland or using GB grain to supply the market, and as well as a risk of shortfall of finished products such as flour or animal feed in Northern Ireland. So I mean, we need the UK government to basically find long-term solutions for this. The current waiver scheme is probably insufficient for the volumes that would be moved under grain, and even state aid limitations there as well for those businesses that are involved in primary agriculture. And then there's also issues then for people claiming duty back. Rules of origin, they continue to be an area of confusion, and we asked basically for clarity on that and a more simple approach that's basically easily understood, and it's delivered basically for the very, very largest trader to the very smallest trader at the primary producer level. So, I mean, we have issues as well for machinery parts and field machinery. I mean, farmers both in GB and in Northern Ireland are experiencing issues moving second-hand machinery between GB and NI. This is obviously, as David Brown, Dr. Deputy President, mentioned there, that machines have to be free of soil and other potential contaminants for entry into Northern Ireland. Yeah, there may be a temporary easement that allows for movement of wash machinery, but there has to be a longer-term solution to be found. And farmers are reporting delays for machinery parts delivered via delivery schemes for up to 7 days. And this isn't good whenever farmers are needing machinery, especially at harvest time, silage time, etc. So we urge basically the UK government and EU to work proactively on this to seek some sort of permanent solution which can suit farmers. So I'll finish there.
Okay, thanks, James.
Yeah.
Thanks, James.
Chair,
go ahead, David.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, no, sorry, apologies. I mean, one thing I omitted there when I was talking about both plant protection products and indeed animal health, I mean, and it's particularly pertaining to this time of year, the seeds, and just was reminded of it when James was speaking about, the seeds that we bring in, cereal seeds, those come in from GB, and again this year, due to testing and labelling requirements of those seeds, it basically has created a severe limitation of the number or type of varieties that our farmers will have available. So those farmers are going out to sow their barley, their wheat, whatever it is, their rape. All of those things, they would have had full access to the full range of seed types that were normally available in GB. That is no longer the case, and it is limiting the choice of varieties, but it is also increasing the cost to those Northern Ireland growers.
David, why is it limiting the varieties? Is that just because there isn't the EU's not recognising the certification? What's the reason for that?
Yeah, they have to go through a process of being certified. That takes quite a period of time. Normally, that certification was accepted and recognised when GB was not a third country. Under the auspices of being a third country, it basically means anything coming into Northern Ireland has to go through that regulatory testing and checking and labelling. And fundamentally what they've said is we can't do that for every variety that you used to have. We will try and do it for a number of varieties. So that's the limiting factor, is the laboratories that do that testing and labelling. And it all has to be done in order to accredit that seed, because we don't want to bring diseases, and that was always the case. We don't want to bring diseases into our growers as well. So it's the laboratory testing and requirements that are needed there that has limited the variety of seeds that are going to be available now for planting currently.
Okay, thanks, David. Team, just before we start our questioning, I've allowed a bit of latitude beforehand so everybody can get their 10-second soundbite of party political broadcast to put up on social media. But can we concentrate on asking questions on specifics for this particular sector when we do this as well? But over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. I'll endeavour to do that and thank you both, David and James, for the presentation. I appreciate for the last few years it's been a very stressful and uncertain time for farmers, and well done for your organisation and kind of representing your members' interests and helping guide them through it. Just a few kind of, I guess, underlying questions. One is, I suppose, on some of the, I mean, you make the point in your briefing that an SPS, and we strongly agree with this, that an SPS agreement is kind of critical to a lot of these things. I mean, I suppose, a basic point at the start, David, I think you're Fermanagh based. Do you think it would, I mean, would it be, if we didn't have, I wish there was a complete Swiss-style UK-EU alignment, but if there, do you think it would be possible to have an SPS border, as it were, between Fermanagh and Cavan, in the sense that, the level of checks that are required between the EU and a third country, do you think that would be possible to do or advisable, just in terms of the...
Yeah, I can recall, Matthew, taking out Karen Bradley back in her time as Secretary of State onto a dairy farm here on the border, supplying his milk across the border. And, some of the suggestions around how this might be facilitated or made possible, I would have to say were neither acceptable to the farmer nor indeed to myself, representing the Ulster Farmers Union. So I think the difficulty you have with anything that needs the checks, because, and the haulage guys talked about this, the just-in-time, that it couldn't apply more to fresh produce. Your milk that's collected daily, and we went through a process when there were discussions around the potential for a Brexit that would, I suppose, basically mean that all of the lorries and the milk going onto those lorries, milk haulage lorries, would have to be checked at a point. So in other words, that haulage firm would have to pull in its lorry and get the paperwork done. It would have been a regulatory nightmare. So in that respect, I suppose, and I'm using the milk as an example, but I think in one respect we have got, and maybe we haven't went into the detail of that, because the unfettered access that we have to GP does, and the haulage guys have covered it well enough, I don't need to go back over that ground. It's not unfettered in the sense that, the level of paperwork and documentation, but that on an Irish border would have been equally difficult, if not equally as impossible. And I think, I'm certainly not advocating that SPS checks, between GB and Northern Ireland have turned out to be a complete and utter nightmare. And they're talking 2,800 checks currently being done at the port by our Deira Veterinary Service, who have struggled to deliver that. If we did not have, as is currently the case, an extension of these grace periods, they were talking about 15,000, which is equivalent to 20% of the checks in the whole of the EU. It's just unmanageable, and I think that's the frustration, that we've kicked down the road with grace periods, but it's not a solution.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful, David. I believe just on. Are you seeing, so one part of the protocol, clearly there definitely are, and contrary to what others have said, there are issues we need to streamline and sort in terms of movement of goods from GB to NI under the protocol, but one thing that I suppose Northern Irish agri-producers have theoretically is the access. Northern Ireland food can unlike food produced in GB, can get into the EU market. Are any of your members availing of that, and are they in the sense that a Cumber spud can get seamlessly onto a French supermarket shelf? I don't know whether many French Carrefour buy many Cumber spuds, but if they did, they could. Spuds grown in Cambridgeshire can't. Are farmers, producers noticing that? Is it useful?
Well, I suppose, Matthew, I'd probably take a step back and say it's normal. It's what we always had. So I think the distinction or the comparison probably I would make in that respect is with maybe a counterpart in, and you mentioned, south of England, I don't know, somebody in Kent or wherever that might be, they're having an absolute nightmare to get that produce across. So, and look, we all worry about the problem that and the difficulties that we have.
Yes.
So I get in that respect to say getting it across the Irish border and into the rest of the EU is something that we have always been able to do, and therefore in that respect I would say at farmer level we're not seeing that level of stress in terms of getting the produce away. I used the example of milk earlier. It's the haulage companies and the processing businesses are dealing with a lot of that documentation and paperwork. And to be fair, at farmer level, I'd have to say we have been in some way shielded from all of that.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question for you, James, is just really what's the picture in terms of labour, EU labour in terms of farms here. I guess it's particularly, but not exclusively, in the arable sector, and we obviously wouldn't have proportionally as much of an arable sector as, for example, the Lincolnshire, etc. But is it being noticed by your members, the impact of sort of labour shortages, EU labour shortages?
David, would you like me to come in on that one?
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of the past month, Matthew, we've been increasingly worried about this. We have written to all Northern Ireland MPs. We have written to dear Minister, with the Economy Minister, and in fact Secretary of State, and in fact our President and our Chief Executive are meeting in London today with Priti Patel on this issue. Our main concern is processing side. If there's hold-ups there, I was in a meeting this morning held by DERA, and there are certain sectors where they're having certain issue. Yeah, that may be on the processing side, but I mean that will affect the primary breeders, because if they are limited on the amount of kill that they can do in their factory, I mean that means they can't take the full kill of that farmer, and that obviously has issues with farmer having enough space, etc., on their farm, and secondly, cash flow issues as well, because they're used getting a certain amount of money coming in, obviously, to pay the bank back. And I mean, this is right across every sector. We have got your variable, you have your horticulture, red meat, we've got the pig sector, and reports in obviously of the dairy sector as well. And that horticulture sector, again, yeah, that's your picking. So that really is at the grassroots level. But then those other sectors, that is at the processing side, which has a subsequent knock-on effect then with the farmer.
Okay, that's
farmer.
Thank you.
Thank you, James and David. Thanks for your information. I have just one question regarding the command paper. Just a general open question, what's your thoughts on the command paper and how far should that go?
Well, I suppose I'll make this really simple. If what was in the command paper was delivered, it would, I suppose, deliver a number of solutions that are particular to agriculture. I think the difficulty we have is, and I said this at the outset, we've had warm words. They call it in formality and sympathy, but in reality we haven't had action. And I think fundamentally, you know, those farmers who've been bringing you, myself or the President in the last number of weeks about the sheep sales that are taking place across in England, they can scarcely beggar belief that, you know, a year on, they're in the same position. So, and I don't know, James, do you want to come in and comment on specifics in the command paper? But look, you know, reality of it is, I don't know when Lord Frost or indeed Westminster are planning to deliver some of this, but from our perspective, some of these things need moved on.
I'll cover three issues on it. There's the live animals. I mean, it seems their objectives for live animals are pretty clear, basically to take trade back to pre-Brexit requirements, which we would like to know how that is, and we'd like to know more info on that. Then there's also, you know, because David, our Deputy President there, mentioned earlier on about scrapie, so, you know, and the issues of retagging and what will that mean, and hopefully that would sort that out. So there's a wee bit more info needed on that one. There's plants as well, and what is realistic in terms of that, and can we build on like a farmer plant passport regime and add in other mitigations, and any of your ancillary issues like the machinery with soil and mixed pallet loads, etc., and any mitigations on it. So I mean, yeah. Good start, but we need a wee bit more info on it.
And just one final question, James or David. Where is the agricultural industry going to be in another 12 months if some of these things, or the things you just mentioned, are not implemented?
Well, I'll give one example, give James time to think, Keith. I mean, in reality, when you look at the genetics, for example, the pool of genetics, Northern Ireland's a small place. 24 or 24,500 farms, many of them very small scale, you know, less than half of them full-time farms, I suppose. But in truth, you know, and we punch well above our weight in the marketplace, and particularly around pedigree animals, we punch really well above our weight. When you see the results from the Sterling Bull sales, or indeed the Ram sales even in recent weeks, some of the prices and some of the headlines that have been got in the farming press have been, in the past, very much allocated to Northern Ireland. And yet, I suppose we find ourselves in a place now at present where a lot of those breeders, and I have had phone calls even in recent months and weeks indeed, from, I'm thinking one Charlie breeder, breeds Charlie cattle, and would regularly have been over at the sales in the autumn. And he just said to me, he says, I can't risk going over there, David, because you have two problems. One, the business people across there, farmers across there, they know fine well, you're coming here with that animal, you're not going to leave it on the shelf. You know, it's for sale, so therefore, you know, you can't hold out price-wise. But in terms of genetics, if we, I suppose, concentrate that pool of genetics in Northern Ireland and don't have that movement of animals from GB into Northern Ireland and vice versa, which, and indeed we've in the past we've had that into ROI and still have, but in reality, an awful lot of the bulls from Northern Ireland do end up, the top ones, do end up, and rams end up going across to those sales in GB, and that is no longer the case because of the constraints that have been placed on that sector of the industry. And it'll not happen in 12 months, but it will over time have a very detrimental impact on the genetic ability of our farmers and breeders to give the best genetics to the livestock guys, like myself, you know, who don't breed pedigrees but are dependent on others who do. James, do you want to add maybe to that?
Yeah, I'll go on to, and it's the same sort of similar issue, and it's seed availability, as Deputy President covered earlier on. I mean, if you're limited to the amount of seed or the different variety of seed which we can plant, that's not a good thing. I mean, you want to have as different a variety as possible, and you know, you've this fear then that basically suppliers and breeders up the Northern Ireland market, as it were just basically too much hassle to supply, and it could reduce the supply even more. In terms of a horticulture end, I mean, in the regards to the use of Topeki, which Debbie covered earlier on, and usage limit and the divergence really between the EU and GB. I mean, you've got scenarios of with basically a plant protection product not authorised for beetroots, carrots, or parsnips, and basically we have an issue of us growing them here in Northern Ireland, basically putting our growers out of the market where they need to look at other veg, etc., that they need to grow. So it's that divergence, etc. And I can't reiterate enough. I don't know how you'd even put what Deputy President covered there in terms of the divergence in the pedigree sector and the genomic. I mean, it would be scary to put a figure. I don't know how you would calculate it, but it would be scary to put the figure on it of what it is. I mean, we pride ourselves here in Northern Ireland for the high genetics and how good a quality of stock that we actually have, and we've just basically put a handbrake on that.
Just one final question, gentlemen. If you were to ask, I don't know whether you have, or if you asked your 24,000 or 24,500 farmers that the Northern Ireland Protocol was a benefit to them, or will it be a positive or a negative, what would the response be?
I think, unfortunately, we have a tendency, and this is true of all aspects of life, we have a tendency to focus on the negative. And I think in relation to the protocol at a farming level, it is probably the negatives that are to the fore. I mean, if I go to any of our committees in the different sectors, they'll all name off the top of their head the things that they see as negatives because it has stopped them doing this or stopped them doing that. On the other side of that, and in answer to Matthew's question earlier, because we're continuing to trade with the EU or with the ROI in the same manner as we did previously, they don't see that as a positive, if you understand where I'm coming from, because it was what we always did. So I think the negatives are much more evident, and they're certainly the negatives are what we get challenged with and raised with, and you know, he's not going to get this sorted out. And the reality of it is, at the highest possible level, particularly our President, had opportunity early in the year to talk to Sefcovic and obviously again, as I said, Michelle Barney and people like that. And I mean, I think the one positive thing I would say, if I wanted to be optimistic, is that in light of recent things which the EU responses to, for example, the UK extending those grace periods, there hasn't been that sort of angst or I suppose volatile response, and maybe that is to create space. I hope it is, but in truth, I mean, how much longer? Because ultimately, the issues that we're facing are very, very real. That guy who was growing the carrots, for example, who raised that issue of that spray initially with us, made the point to us, without the use of that plant protection product, those aphids would just destroy, and I mean, to plant a carrot crop is thousands upon thousands of pounds per acre. So in reality, it is a massive risk, which he just said, I won't be taking that risk if these things aren't available to me. So we won't be growing those carrots, or we won't be growing. We move towards, basically importing more of that stuff in. But in answer to your question, I think if you ask the farmers, unfortunately, they see the negatives and probably haven't appreciated the fact that they, unlike their GB counterparts, are still able to trade.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. Gemma?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David and James. Before I ask my question, I should declare that my father is a small farmer. So just one question. Can you outline how replacement cap and other EU support funding is going to work?
Well, I suppose when we go right back to the last Westminster election, the indication that came from his Boris Johnson's new government was that, and it was in their manifesto, that they would continue to basically provide for the devolved regions the same pot of money. You're probably well enough aware that there is ongoing discussions about how that money will be distributed. Very substantial change in England in terms of the move they have made. The current Minister of Agriculture is obviously working on what future arrangements will be here in Northern Ireland. But the pot of money is only guaranteed to 2024, I think, Gemma, is what I would want to emphasise. And beyond that, there is no certainty. I think fundamentally the indication from those within DEFRA is that money will still come. It will move more towards environmental measures and providing benefits for wider society, and public good is probably one of the favoured words. So in that respect, I think there will be still a level of funding, but as a Fermanagh farmer, and I don't know what your dad keeps, but keeping suckler cows and beef cattle down here, the benefits for productive agriculture will be on a reducing scale is our expectation.
Yeah, if I come in there, basically, we're not going to see any significant change in GRI policy, as David said there, until 2024. There could be things trialled in 2022, 2023, but there'll be no significant change until 2024. There are discussions within DERA have started on what future agriculture policy will look like, which UFU are part of, along NIAPA, Dairy Council, NIMEA, NIFTA, Northern Ireland Environment Link, and there's work streams, and again, this is still at a very high level, looking at agri-environment schemes, capital support, generational renewal, supply chain, coupled support. But what we do know, I suppose, as well, just to confirm it, that under 10.2 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, the max level of agriculture support that we can get is 382.2 million. So we, in terms of that, there's a minimum percentage that can basically to WTO to green box. So basically 17% of that, which equates to around about 50 million of that, could be put into something like coupled support, etc. But that's all under Article 10.2 of the protocol.
Okay, you happy, Gemma?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Manisha?
Thank you, Rovan. Agus buíhas hainniu de rátas. Thank you. You're very welcome here, and in particular for your statements as well too. Just if I can go back on something that has been said there, that the question on the protocol itself, and whether or not the protocol is a mechanism in order to resolve the difficulties, and there are difficulties there, and everyone can identify what the difficulties that exist at present as a result of Brexit and that. And the reason I come back to the same question is that I had the opportunity just a couple of years ago to visit Lac Patrick, and what used to be known as Lake Patrick, in the village of Artygarvan, where they had a major investment dealing there with their end product of them having produced milk, exported it to the Republic of Ireland, or been through a process there, and then brought back again to the north of Ireland, and they then export throughout the world with dried milk product. Now, I did have that opportunity, and this is where I appreciate your comment there, just in saying, if you ask the question, you know, is the protocol a good thing or a bad thing, and people are inclined to always identify with the negatives rather than the positives. But I had that opportunity of asking the chief executive at that time how they were impacted on by Brexit, in particular, not the protocol per se, but by Brexit. And he had expressed the view that they themselves were quite capable of working around it, or working through it, and that how typical is that, we'll say, of the experience of other producers within the whole agricultural industry, given the different sort of nature of production. In many ways, it's not just livestock, but there's other products in that as well too, that they themselves have effectively dealt with the major problems there, and where there are then additional difficulties, that can only be resolved through one of two ways, i.e. the protocol, or by the British government and the European Union addressing the issues directly themselves. What are your opinions on that?
I suppose if I come in first there and give James a moment. In reality, you know, all of those processing businesses, regardless of what sector they're in, I think, like farmers, there's a degree of resilience there. There was, I suppose the biggest difficulty that they had was the fact of the extremely short notice. But having said that, I think, and probably it's reflective of what was said by the haulage guys earlier, and I didn't hear all of it, but I did hear the latter part of their presentation and answers. But in truth, those companies, including the one in Artigarvan, have found a mechanism where the documentation and the paperwork and so forth, they have basically worked through that over the past months. But I don't want for 1 minute, though, to underestimate the additional cost that has brought. And that additional cost, is to those businesses that are obviously filling in documentation, SPS checks, the lorries that end up having to wait, to get those sanitary and phytosanitary checks. So in that respect, there is a cost that is there. And I think as primary producers, as farmers on the ground, we tend to know that in a lot of the produce that we sell, it's a world price, milk, for example, or produce heading to Europe or whatever. We're not going to get more for it because there's more cost. So unfortunately, that cost has only one direction to go. Brexit has, and that documentation and customs checking and all the rest of it has brought that cost, yes. But that cost inevitably gets passed back down the line. And that's the fundamental difficulty we have as an agricultural industry, that the cost of all of this is something which is borne at grassroots level by the farmers on the ground. James, do you want to add anything?
If you, it'll be interesting to see at the end of the profits that are recorded by the companies, whether or not they have bore the cost or whether or not that has come off the litre of milk or the price of kilo for beef or lamb, etc., that they have paid the farmer, and that'll be the interesting one. I would say it most likely will be the latter, and it's come off the litre of the price per litre of milk and of the kilo of beef and lamb.
And finally, just in your opinions, do you feel that agricultural are net beneficiaries as a result of remaining within the single market?
I mean, look, from the very outset, whenever Brexit was being discussed, we made it absolutely clear our desire to stay, and be able to export. But that was both east-west and north-south, if we want to take the European side of that. Because in truth, within the island of Ireland, we have a very integrated agricultural industry. I've cited a few times, I'll not go over it again, the dairy sector, but equally there are other parts. But we don't want to again lose sight of the fact that the vast majority of the produce in Northern Ireland, over 50% of it, and in some sectors, beef, for example, that could be between 80 and 90% of it goes across to GB because. And we've heard this around the whole discussion around climate change about, the fact that Northern Ireland is effectively the breadbasket feeding, quite a large part of the population within GB. And that's true. Sorry, I should say that's true of all of Ireland, because the Southern Irish obviously supply the GB market as well. But anything that, I suppose creates difficulties there, and yes, what's described as unfettered access to the GB market, I would have to say I wouldn't necessarily just recognise it as being entirely unfettered, because you talk, as you have just done, to the haulage guys and the people who are having to deal with that documentation. There is a cost with all of that, as I've said, and I suppose, look, I have to recognise the fact that in some ways, as an agricultural industry, while we have specific issues, and I've only named a half a dozen of them at the outset of our presentation, there are others, and unfortunately, as the months pass, we discover new ones. But, I think the expectation was that each one of those would be taken, one by one. The sheep one was there, we knew that in December, we knew it before we got to the 1st of January. I think there was an expectation and hope that those things could be and would be discussed and resolved. That hasn't taken place, but ultimately being able to trade, into the single market is vitally important. But it is also vitally important that we don't have hindrances in our, working relationship, because we do get a lot of the supplies. It has been mentioned about machinery, parts and things like that come across from GB. And farms operate, again, the haulage guys talked about that just in time. If a part is needed for a machine, and my son-in-law is a store manager in a machinery business, generally speaking, in the past, they were fit to get that within 24 hours. In other words, if you ordered it before 12 o'clock today, you would have it tomorrow morning. And those are things which farmers have grown not just to expect, but to need.
Margaret, and we're still able to export west to east, no problem there. The only difference now being is that we have to eat homegrown sausages as opposed to sausages coming the other way around. So it's a boost to those producers.
It's a bit ironic that the sausage one gets the headline and these other issues that I've listed don't ever get mentioned, but yeah, that's where we are.
And Gurma, thank you once again.
Thanks, Melissa. Jim.
Thank you, gentlemen. The supply issues that you speak of, and they of course are core to the operation of any business, they arise from the absurdity that under the protocol our main market is treated as a third country. If that wasn't so, you wouldn't have their supply problems, would you?
No, you would not.
Yeah. So then going on to the belligerent declaration by the EU chief vet that there be no flexibilities, sort of another version of rigorous implementation. In the context of there being no flexibilities, what are the differences, if any, of substance between the standards applying to food in the United Kingdom and the standards applied by the EU?
Well, I think the first thing to point out, Jim, is that on the 1st of January, absolutely none. And I would say in the vast, vast majority of those areas, 8-9 months later, there are still no difference in the standards. Of course, we do hear discussion in GB about particular aspects that will, over time, diverge. They have not diverged yet. But I think fundamentally what is going to obviously apply within GB is their obvious desire to resume or at least continue to trade with the EU. And if the EU has those standards that GB is going to have to apply at farm level, they are no different than to the standards that we in Northern Ireland have had and will continue to have.
So what we are suffering is the consequence of an ideological purism from the EU in circumstances where practically there is nothing to protect in terms of a detriment to the single market. Isn't that right?
Well, I can't put a percentage on it, but I mean the point was made earlier by some of the haulage folk, that 75% of this stuff coming into Northern Ireland remains in Northern Ireland, and 95% of it should never have needed checks at any point, because the standard of what we're bringing into Northern Ireland, if it is going to go on ahead into ROI, obviously they're stipulating that needs to be checked. But the reality of it is we're checking stuff that is being consumed and used here in Northern Ireland at a whim of it's a political decision. Like at the end of the day,
and we're checking stuff which meets exactly the same standard as the area we're checking it for. So it really is an absurdity. You heard the RHA people talk about the chicken coming in, I think it was from Thailand, through Rotterdam, through the island of Ireland into GB, all unfettered because it's already been checked at Rotterdam. And yet if that chicken, having been processed, comes back to be sold in Ballymena, it has to be checked.
Yeah, I mean, I could give you countless examples. I think of one, a dairy company in France sent produce across into GB, soft cheeses, and it could no longer come to Northern Ireland, despite the fact that it just left the EU. They did not have the logistics because of the small market in Northern Ireland to send it directly from France, so they sent it through their distribution centre in GB, but it could no longer come into Northern Ireland. So there are countless examples of that.
You talked to us about the black-faced sheep, and you talked to us about the tagging, the absurdity of that. etc. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the compounds for our feedstuffs and our fertiliser supplies. Where do those compounds primarily come from?
I'm going to hand over to James in a minute here rather than me do all of the talking, because I appreciate he's well informed as I am. But in reality, a lot of the compound feed that we bring in does come from outside of the EU. But James, do you want to maybe comment on that in respect of the question?
Well, I mean, there's a variety where there are issues, and I'd mentioned earlier on where do come from GB and the extra bureaucracy that they're now in, extra paperwork that they're now facing, especially for the milling coming in now to Northern Ireland. It does put them off in terms of, and you may see a distribution of trade now where that
a diversion of trade.
Yeah.
And if you don't see a diversion of trade, what's going to be the impact on feedstuff prices?
We're seeing that at the moment, I suppose, David.
Yeah.
So just tell us a little bit about that in terms of the impact on prices of the bureaucratic burden being imposed as a consequence of this no flexibility attitude.
Now, how much of it can actually be attributed to the protocol? There are labour issues, etc., in factories, and that has caused a significant cost. So, but I mean, I think last week there was another increase of £15 per tonne. Percentage-wise of what that has been, I would need to do a quick math here in my head of what percentage increase has been on this time last year. I mean, it is now a significant input cost now on farms. Is the price of grain or the price of meal, concentrate, etc., which comes on farm. It is needed on a lot of farms here in Northern Ireland, and it's putting serious financial pressure on farms at the moment. There's no question that on the price of feed on Northern Ireland farms.
And if the compound suppliers in GB said it's not worth the hassle, we'll sell somewhere that's easier, where would that leave us in terms of our feedstuffs?
Well, I guess I see James smiling at me. The reality of it is, again, and it goes back to this thing of what have been normal, traditional supply chain issues. Where particular grains of whatever variety have come from the GB marketplace or indeed from other parts of the world. But in reality, all of that has been distorted to an extent. And I think, I would agree with James, it's hard to quantify how much of it is specific to the protocol, and how much of it is specific. Because, I mean, a lot of those prices are world prices. And I mean, fundamentally, you get a good harvest in another part of the world and the price drops. You get a poor harvest and it goes up. So, I mean, it's very difficult to determine exactly how much of it you could put down to the protocol. But in truth, again, the haulage guys actually, I would say, are pretty well placed to indicate, the level of bureaucracy that is now levelled with them and anything at all that they bring in. Not just the haulage guys. I mean, the online companies and all the rest of it. Anybody who's sending anything from GB to Northern Ireland knows there's a cost associated with it. And I just, to be honest, Jim, couldn't quantify how much of that cost is specific to those SPS checks as opposed to world prices.
My final point was this. We're in a situation, so long as the protocol pertains, that at the whim of the EU, the rules of the game can be changed by them, in that we, without any input, without any ability to change anything, are subject to EU governance and legislation on all these matters. So just as recently we had the nonsense about the pesticide for carrots, so tomorrow you could have some other madness affecting us, and all that beyond our control, because we've surrendered sovereignty and control to foreign governors. Isn't that right?
Yeah, come in that one, David. I suppose one big one we have there is I suppose what we'll have to adhere to now in Northern Ireland is the EU animal health law. Yeah. I'm concerns with what we'll have to apply to, or what farmers will have to apply to under it. And I mean, as of April of this year, we are now under the EU animal health law, and unfortunately, we have no say on how that affects us.
Yeah, I mean, an example of that, Jim, just specific to that animal health law, is the pre-movement TB testing, which is something which will be a burden of cost on farmers. Because DAERA have indicated quite clearly that if they are to apply this, that they will not be covering the cost of that. So all of these things, and you're quite right. I mean, that Topeki spray, that arrived on our desks, at the end of a week, and we were scrambling by the beginning of the next week to see, well, what is the solution? And the reality of it is, for many of these things, there isn't a solution, because there's not something that we can turn around and say, well, here, what about using that, or what about importing this and doing something completely different that would solve that? And fundamentally, all of those things either bring difficulties in terms of the ability to grow the crop or raise the animal or whatever it is, or on the other side of it, it increases the cost of doing so. And I think in most instances, it's the increase in cost has become evident from the very outset of all of this, from the 1st of January, and that increase in cost, I would have to say our farmers, and certainly from a UFU perspective, we lobbied away to try and see could there not be a solution. Take the sheep one, for example, but there has been no solution brought forward. So while we have good intentions in terms of command papers and words, we have not had action.
And if one side is saying belligerently no flexibility, doesn't give you much hope, does it?
Well, look, that's earlier in the year. I think at that stage they were obviously, there was a pretty adverse reaction to a unilateral decision that the UK took early part of the year. Maybe that reaction has been a little muted, more recently in terms of, I suppose, extending grace periods and so on. But as I said earlier, extension of grace periods is not a solution, and indeed that's what we need.
Agree with you there. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed. Philip.
Yep, thank you, Chair. It always takes a few seconds from you call me till I am able to unmute myself. So thank you, James and David. Really appreciate coming along, and it's been very interesting and useful in terms of passing on information to us. I should declare, just like Gemma, that I have family members who are farmers as well. Obviously, I represent North Antrim, and the first issue you raised was the issue of sheep and black-faced sheep, and obviously that's very, very prevalent within the hill farming community of North Antrim. I actually had a couple of constituents contacting me recently with regard to the issue. It is disappointing, I suppose, that there hasn't been some movement on the issue as we move towards September, October, because people will be wanting to import ewes from Scotland for breeding season. So, I'm right in saying, David or James, that you were able to attend the meeting with Maurice Sefcovic when he was over here. So, I'm making the assumption that this was an issue that was raised, or that you are pushing hard for. Do you get a sense that within the mechanisms of the protocol, that your voice is being heard, and that that there can and will be some movement on issues, for example, like the black-faced sheep issue?
I suppose, Philip, look, I probably was much more positive and hopeful of that in January. The fact that we're still 8-9 months later leads me to some level of despair that it's not been resolved, because you're quite right, those farmers in North Antrim that you represent, and are represented obviously by other parties too, those are the people on the ground that this is having a direct and a severe impact on what they have done, and what they've done for many, many years. It's part of their business. They buy those replacements. They will not be buying them this autumn any more than obviously having gone through the debacle that they've experienced last autumn's sheep, who, well, they had an expectation they were going to be able to bring them in January, February, and weren't. And some of those went for slaughter, which is rather regrettable because they're good breeding quality sheep, so they were sent for slaughter. Others, farmers have held on and they hope that it would be resolved. But I think in terms of the engagement we've had, I think probably not through the mechanisms of the protocol, I have to say, but in reality, through COPA COGECA, which is the EU body which all of the agricultural communities and representatives, the presidents basically, and their deputy presidents have a voice. We have been allowed by the EU to remain part of that as Northern Ireland, and it's through that mechanism where the President, Victor Chestnut, has had opportunity, alongside the meetings where Maris Sefcovic has come across here, he has had opportunity on some occasions, albeit on Zoom calls with COVID, to speak to Michel Barnier and those folk. But, it's not a case of and I'm sure Victor, I wasn't there, but I'm sure Victor did raise it again at the more recent meeting with Sefcovic. But in reality, we were raising this from the first week of January, because we knew in December it was going to be an issue, and unfortunately still is.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of, just explored some of, I know it was raised earlier about the opportunities for exports, but we've kind of covered a lot of some of the issues and problems. In terms of exploration of potential wins and more opportunities, how do the UFU see that in terms of the agri-food sector?
I think ironically, and I'll let James come in a moment on this, ironically actually the positives that we've heard from UFU members are not those who are exporting, but those who within Northern Ireland have replaced people who were sending stuff into Northern Ireland. So, for example, some of our artisan food producers have sought out and found opportunity within Northern Ireland to supply locally here, where perhaps previously that was being sourced from GB or elsewhere. So the actual opportunities for export, I'd have to say, are more difficult at this stage to tie down. I think the real concern we have, obviously, with the movement of Westminster towards trade deals across the rest of the world is more likely to be a threat to us than an opportunity. But at the same time, I think farmers have always looked for, sought out, and created opportunities, and the processing businesses that we supply to, they're out there seeking out those markets. But James, I'm not really confident to identify any additional export opportunities. They're more to do with, as I say, supplying into restaurants and businesses here within Northern Ireland.
Yeah, that's more of a domestic. You take trade deals that we've done. We're not even on a listing for red meat. We're not even on a listing to be able to supply to Australia in terms of that trade deal because of old BSE cases, etc. So we don't have an opportunity there in terms of our red meat sector. But yeah, it's more that domestic market and be able to cater for it would be the main opportunity there at the moment.
Okay, and just one final point, Chair, because it was raised there by David in terms of the Australian export deal. How worried are the UFU and its members about the potential damage of that particular deal, but probably other deals that the British government may force through in terms of our market and the opportunities for local farmers, given that potentially we could see imports from Australia of beef and other products at a lower standard. So, how worried are you about potential impact of trade deals on the agri-food sector here?
I would say we're very concerned. Particular aspects of the trade deals and even more recent discussion around the removal of some of the climate-related aspects in the Australian discussions. It seems to be a headlong rush to get trade deals over the line. Maybe that's to prove a point, and that's in one respect, I suppose that's fair enough. But at the other side of it, if you don't protect your own domestic production, given that the UK is somewhere in around 60% self-sufficient in food production, the real risk and danger is that we actually reduce that self-sufficiency, so that in order to feed the nation, we end up importing more of it from further and further afield. Cost base in Argentina, Brazil, wherever that might be, is in a completely different place to what it is on our small family farms. But I think really, the other aspect of this is in relation to extending these grace periods. Currently, if our GB for that matter is exporting to the EU, excuse me, they have to fulfil all of those requirements on checks and so forth. And yet, on the other side of that equation, and it was supposed to be June, then it was supposed to be October, and now it's maybe the middle of next year. For EU businesses selling produce into the UK, there's no restriction whatsoever. And that's fundamentally because I believe Westminster government recognised that if they were to put restrictions, they would have serious problems with empty shelves. But I don't know, James, is that you want to add to that?
To go back to this trade, as an organisation, we were extremely disappointed basically how the whole deal was handled by the UK government. There was 22 recommendations made by the Trade and Agriculture Commission at the time, and government didn't respond right away to them. We're really, really shocked at how much access that the UK granted to Australia in its trade deal. You can say there's tariff rate quotas are there, however, but they only really come in terms of after a surge of something which comes in. Trade with Asia at the moment is good, so it's unlikely that we're going to see the immediate effect of this trade deal. But if trade with Asia was ever to drop, then you could see displacement of that coming in to the UK. And again, I mentioned it there 5 minutes ago. UK beef is not listed as a third country for Australia imports. So it's a one-way deal in terms of red meat. We would highlight really food security a major reason to be against this trade deal.
Okay.
And environmental issues too, Philip.
Other safeguards need to be put in there.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed, David and James, and thank you very much indeed for your comprehensive evidence. And can I say I look forward to seeing both of you hopefully next Wednesday at the show, and no doubt you'll be looking for me, and I'll be looking for you as we normally do. But thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for giving your evidence. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Cheers. Moving on fairly swiftly, team. Moving on to the next item, number 10, correspondence index. Members asked to note the index of the 5 received items, correspondence, page 118. Pivotal tracker report, page 121. Tracker report provided by Pivotal that reviews the executive performance in 2021 so far and suggests priorities for the future. Are we content to note? Noted. Department response and fire safety. Members asked to consider at page 134 a departmental response in regards to the committee's request to see sight of the UK Government's guidance on fire safety remediation, which was published on the 21st of July 2021. The UK Government's guidance appears to argue that buildings below 18 metres are low risk and don't require a fire assessment review, an EWS 1, and that there has been a disproportionate reactions in some parts of the market. The UK Government is to launch an indemnity scheme for professionals to complete fire safety reviews where needed. The UK Government argues that remediation work in buildings between 11 and 18 metres in height will be limited. Committee, are we content to write to the head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service and ask if the Executive is planning to bring forward legislation to match the Fire Safety Act, ensuring external walls are assessed for fire risk as part of the routine assessments, and Building Safety Bill, there's just slightly more to it, introducing a safety regime for higher risk multi-residence buildings and the creation of a building safety regulator. I think that's quite important, the building safety regulator. Are we content? Indeed. Thank you. Agreed. Defamation bill scheduling. Members are asked to note on page 147 a copy of the letter to the Business Committee from the Minister objecting to the scheduling of the second stage of the defamation bill on Tuesday. Members are also asked to note the response from the Speaker, which is tabled items. I'd just like to say I find the whole thing quite surprising, and I didn't really work out what the problem was. But I do note the Minister's more conciliatory tone when he actually, for those of us who sat there and listened to when he responded at the second reading of the bill. So I must admit, before, when I read the letters, I was a bit concerned on behalf of the committee about the tone of it, but I actually thought the Minister brought it back a bit, and I'm reasonably content. Are we content to note? Yeah, great. Defamation.
Sorry, I think we should write back to the Minister. And, I mean, that's the two, on behalf of the above points I request the Business Committee. I thought, just correct me if I'm wrong, the Business Committee is for the members.
Yeah. But
so I think that, I would put that in writing.
I would do normally, Pat, but the Minister, when he responded to Mike Desmond on the second reading, and he said I think I would need to check answered, but I think he said, like, I apologise if there was anything or any complaints, and I take from the Minister that he realised that maybe some of his officials had overreached. So I think, in general terms, I think we're happy enough with that. Next item, Defamation Bill Principles. Members are asked to also note at page 149 a copy of correspondence from the Minister to the Defamation Bill sponsor. The Minister states his support for the reform of defamation law, but indicates that he is unlikely to support the passage of the bill, arguing that new legislation is required but makes good on the perceived shortcomings of the 2013 Act. This was circulated to members by email prior to the second stage of the bill. Are we content to note? Yeah. Note. Great. Spending review timeline. Members are also asked to note at page 154 a response from the Minister regarding the timings of the spending review. As members are already aware, the outcome is to be published by Her Majesty's Treasury on the 22nd of October 21. We expecting it could be slightly later than that, was it, Peter?
Well, I think Matthew opined last week that it would probably be later based on his experience in Treasury, and colleagues in RAISE seem to be of the same opinion, so it may be a little later than that. But that is their stated date. Okay. Are we content to note? Noted. And the composite request is page 158. Are we content that is an accurate and complete record of the committee's information request? Is this agreed? Yeah. Great. Excellent. Moving on to the forward work programme. Draft forward work programme is page 171. I'm asked to note that, sorry, just one item. Keith, because I'm attending the Commonwealth Conference next week, would you be in a position to chair the committee next Wednesday?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. No. Members are asked to note that next week the committee will receive three oral briefings on the legislative. It wasn't planned that way. On the legislative consent motion on the public sector pensions and judicial offences bill. As the LCM may have some relevance for the judiciary and other public sector workers, is the committee content to write to relevant statutory committees, including Justice, Education and communities, enclosing the relevant information and seeking their views, if any? Are we agreed? Agreed. Defamation Bill is passed at second stage. The committee content for the clerk to place an advertisement in newspapers and on social media regarding a related call for evidence, which will close on the 1st of November, Peter? Yep. Are we agreed? Agreed. Yep. Is the committee also content for the clerk to write to potential consultees as indicated in the tabled list? I think we're agreed. Yep. And we thought we'd get Professor Scott, is it?
First, yes, if that's
First
okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep. Yes. And I would quite like him, if it was possible, if we could have him here in person, because I think that would be more suitable for interaction. Okay. It's unclear how many responses there will be for a call for evidence. Members are asked to note that the committee may consequently have to schedule additional sessions before Christmas and to meet early in the new year in order to ensure the committee reports before the start of February 2022. If we're actually in a position we're still here, I think that would be a pleasant thing enough to deal with at that stage. Okay. Given the passage of the Defamation Bill and the pressure on committee work meeting times, the committee content for the clerk to revise the forward work programme in order to bring forward consideration of the financial reporting bill to early in October rather than November. I think we should agree to that. Agreed. Is the committee content to include briefings from the Fiscal Commission on tax varying powers and from RAISE prior to the spending review before Halloween recess, if possible? And I think I would quite like to talk to Paul Johnson if we had that opportunity as well. Great. And it would be, I think he's planning to be over in Northern Ireland, so if we could tie it in with when he's actually here, or we might say he might schedule his programme in such a way that it would be good if he was actually here. Are we content with the forward work programme? Great. Any other business? No. Thank you. Date and time of next meeting, 22nd in here at 1400. Thank you very much indeed. I hereby adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber